everyone, and welcome to our polyamory education charity fundraiser, Poly4Paly. I'm so grateful that so many of you are here. Please say hi in the chat. Ideally, if you're not speaking, please keep your cameras and mics off. And yeah, just a bit of housekeeping, I suppose. But yeah, I'm really grateful that so many of you are here, and I'm really excited for all the sharing and learning that's going to be happening over the next 3 hours. If you could say hello in the chat and maybe say where you're joining from. I think we've got a bunch of people from all around the world who've come together for this, which is really amazing to see. And I'm seeing a lot of interaction in the chat already. Amazing. So we have a wide range of speakers covering a wide variety of topics within non-monogamy today. Unfortunately, one of us had to withdraw last minute due to capacity issues, but the rest of us are here and we are ready. So I'm here today to introduce the speakers and facilitate the event. Each speaker will have the floor for 5 minutes to share their big idea. And I'm in control of everyone's audio because there's a lot of us here and there's a lot of us still joining. I'm multitasking as I'm doing this. And I don't want to, don't want this to descend into literal chaos. But I really encourage you to engage in the chat because when someone is speaking, those of us who aren't speaking will be active and answering everyone's questions to do with non-monogamy in the chat. So if you have any questions about what's going on, just put it in the chat. Everyone can share and discuss, and hopefully there'll be kind of some lively interaction going on there as well. So, like I said, this is a polyamory education event to raise funds for the charity Medical Aid for Palestinians. So right now we've raised wait, let me actually check the live number. We have raised 12,981 British pounds, which is, I think, equivalent to about I want to say 16,500 US dollars. And also a number of you have also donated a handful of eSIMs directly to the Gaza eSIMs project. So I just have to say, that's fucking amazing. I'm really proud of all of us. Thank you to each and every single one of you for contributing to such an important cause. According to the Medical Aid for Palestinians website, their local team are themselves Palestinians from Gaza, and the funds will be going to supporting them with sourcing and delivering humanitarian supplies and personnel where it's needed. So during the event today, if you particularly like what someone is saying and you want to give a tip or whatever, we are still accepting donations. So, you can either go to the event link itself, or if you want to avoid some fees, then, I'd suggest that you, I'm just going to put the link in the chat now. Use this link. So paypal.me/Leanne Yau, and send your tip or donation there. And I'll add it to the total when I make the donation after the event is over. Ideally, if you could, make the donation and just put a note saying that's a donation, that would make it a lot clearer for me. But I'm just going to add it all to the total when the event is over. So yeah, if I'm very grateful to those of you who've already donated to be here. But if you have the capacity to give more, if you want to, then that would be really, really great as well. And yeah, we'll make the money go even further. Okay, so. As much as the topics in this event are about polyamory, I think we can't forget that what we are doing this for, right? I'm sure a lot of you are aware that as individual creators, we've all spoken out to different extents in our platforms for a wide variety of reasons, and also for some of us, this event is the first time that we've shown unambiguous public support for Palestine. And I also want to stress, because I've seen some discourse about this, that the people who are speaking at this event today are not an exhaustive list of all the non-monogamy creators who are in support of Palestine. There are loads of people who are very supportive, but couldn't make it for a variety of reasons. And so, please do not assume someone's political position or enthusiasm for the cause or inaction or action or whatever based on their presence or absence at this event. There are loads of us who have been taking action offline as well in ways that are equally meaningful, and I really encourage people to use their energy to make a difference where it really matters. Not all of us are well versed in speaking about what is going on, but at the end of the day, all of us here have a shared goal of showing solidarity as a group for Palestine and standing against genocide, which is why we come together for this event by doing what we know, to raise funds for a cause that we want to support. There's always more to be done, right? Like, I'm very aware that, like, this shouldn't be the end of it. And the last thing I want is for us to be complacent. And so to that end, if you want to learn more about Palestine and educate yourself on the history, then Mel from Radikal Relating, who was one of the speakers today, has put together this really, really amazing resource list that I'm going to put in the chat now. Yeah, like, it has a lot of really good reading and extra resources if you want to learn about like what's happening right now. So anyway, with all of that out of the way, I'd like to get the ball rolling and introduce our first speaker. So our first speaker is Marla, also known as Marla. And Marla will be sharing their story of self-abandonment in the face of jealousy and the value of engaging with hard feelings. So I've just asked them to unmute, and hopefully they'll turn their video on. And let me add a spotlight for you right there. Okay. Yeah. Feel free to begin when you're ready.
Hi, everyone. I am Marla. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a therapist and educator focused on non-monogamous relationships. I'm currently tuning in from Portland, Oregon, 3 hours jet lagged in the past. I'm usually located near Toronto, Canada, on the land of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. Before I jump into my piece about self-abandonment in non-monogamy, I do want to say that I have a special connection to Palestinian liberation as someone who was raised a Zionist, a Jewish Zionist. And I have been speaking out against Zionism for many, many years before it was on sort of the world stage in the way it is now. And this is a very, very important part and like cause to my heart. But self-abandonment in non-monogamy. So as someone who spends some of their time doing therapeutic work, a lot of my sort of frame of reference is in trauma theory and attachment theory. And without getting deep into it, because I could give a whole day workshop about this, attachment theory really looks at the ways that we are engaging with the experience of abandonment and rejection in our relationships. And so I wanted to talk about the way abandonment, but specifically the ways that we might self-abandon in non-monogamous dynamics and how that can be very specific to non-monogamy. And I'm going to do that through sharing a bit of a story. So I've been practicing non-monogamy for almost 20 years, and I'm still with the partner that I started doing this with when we were 18. But about 13 years into our relationship, after having been in all kinds of permutations of dating together and separately, a new person came into our lives. And this person was definitely developing a closer, faster, stronger dynamic with my partner than with me, even though we were all hanging out together and separately. And there was this one night in particular where we had all hung out, we'd had some dinner, we were over at our place, and then we were saying our goodbyes. And I, had a hug with this person, and then my partner went to sort of see them out. And I remember standing at the top of the stairs and waiting and waiting and waiting for my partner to kind of come back and wondering what they might be up to. And, were they having like a long, exciting kiss? And all of a sudden, all of these insecurities and jealousy feelings, right, rooted in that insecurity started coming up for me, maybe even also rooted in unmet needs that I had for this kind of closeness, right? I was feeling left out. However, rather than, and this is something I try to support people with all the time, rather than working through the jealousy by discussing it with my partner, with this new person, right? Rather than kind of investigating what was really going on, all of a sudden I was like, Marla, you are a non-monogamy educator. You can't be jealous right now. I mean, again, this is many years ago. It's like 7 years ago, but there was this idea that I wasn't allowed to be experiencing these things because in my head, the words were, you signed up for this. This is the kind of world that you want to be living, right? Like this is something you've consented to. And so rather than engaging with what was going on, what I found myself doing was trying to suppress or repress or dismiss those feelings. I abandoned myself and my own reality for the sense of greater good for all the other people involved, right? This idea that I wasn't supposed to or allowed to be feeling this thing or these things. And what ended up happening through that self-abandonment, and again, I'm giving you one story here. I have many others of my own, and also many other stories from people that I've worked with, where we will have this tendency, right? It's like, I read about non-monogamy, I read about polyamory, I've drunk the blue Kool-Aid of non-monogamy, which is like a joke I make. It's like sort of funny, I guess, sorry. But this idea that like, I bought into this thing, therefore I'm not supposed to feel these other things. And then we override our real experiences because we're trying to perform what we think non-monogamy is supposed to be. And so what I learned from this, and what I'm hoping everybody can kind of take away from this, is that just because we're feeling hard feelings doesn't mean that they're not allowed to have space at the table. And if anything, I would say, please give them space at the table, because what happened when I abandoned myself, my feelings, and ultimately these relationships as a result of that is that it created way more conflict. I was suppressing these feelings, therefore having these other kind of unnecessary arguments in our relationships, because there was this like tension within me that I just wasn't, oh, I'm almost done, because I was refusing to engage with what was really happening, right? It was this idea that like, no, let's just push it down. But I always say that feelings are like a game of whack-a-mole, right? When you try to push some down, if they're not being addressed, then they're going to pop up in another place. And so this ended up being a much longer, much more conflicting time in all of our relationships, because I would not acknowledge and abandoned my own experience of really tough feelings, because relationships can be hard, but hard doesn't equal bad. And so this is the story that I leave you with today. And I thank you all. And thank you, Leanne, for putting this together. It's really a gift to be part of this community.
Yeah, very important, definitely, to remember that polyamory doesn't have to be performance, and it's important to be authentic about how you're actually feeling, and not feel shame about that. Okay, moving on. Our next speaker is Radikal, and Radikal will be talking about their experience of polyamory as a tool for healing attachment wounds and a codependency. I'm just gonna quickly spotlight them, and let me do that.
Hello, friends. I'm Radikal. I do a quick intro I pre-recorded my video because I'm a chronically ill baby. So we will be streaming a pre-recorded speech. But I'm really, really grateful to be here, and I will be live in the chat answering any questions if you have them. Hello, everyone. It is so wonderful to be here. Thank you to Leanne for hosting such a beautiful event, and for everyone speaking for your time, energy, and wisdom. Thank you also to everyone in attendance for your generous donations to our cause and for being here to learn with us today. My name is Radikal. I use they, them, and he, him pronouns, and I am the sex educator and chronic illness advocate behind Queering Sex. I graduated with a degree in sociology last spring, and I've only formally been doing this work since November of last year. So speaking at such an impactful event so early in my career is such a privilege, and I'm so grateful to be here. For the next few minutes, I will be sharing with you my experiences of non-monogamy as a tool for healing attachment wounds and codependency. I do want to give a gentle trigger warning for discussions of relational trauma, and I encourage you to take care of your heart and step away if you need to. For me, healing attachment is about two main things. Firstly, it is about reframing our learned narratives. Just as we can reframe anxiety into excitement, we can reframe jealousy, envy, or feelings of betrayal into compersion, understanding, and deeper care. I say this not to excuse any abusive dynamics of betrayal, continual hurt, or violation of consent or trust, but rather to help us realize that we can learn from the hard feelings and that we can reframe them when it's appropriate. My deepest healing of my attachment wounds and relational patterns came from reframing my anxious brain's rattlings on into productive narratives about what was going on in my internal emotional landscape. Secondly, healing attachment wounds is about nervous system regulation. For me, this looks a variety of ways. It looks like taking space when I need it, asking myself and others what's happening in our bodies at any given moment, and somatic practices like dancing, shaking, diaphragmatic breathing, and cold exposure. Getting to the point of being able to cope with difficult feelings in both brain and body took a lot of work in therapy and a lot of trial and error. As a kid, I grew up in a tight-knit, nourishing family, but it still had insidious, codependent, and mutually enabling dynamics despite this. I learned to choose either a fawn response to keep the peace or to defend myself vehemently, even if it meant perpetuating conflict. I leaned really heavily into both directions, depending on the situation. But as I got older, that self-assertion side became almost aggressive, and it scared off anyone I tried to connect with. I spent my entire adolescence seeking intensity, which led me to spend a few months in a relationship with someone I had met online, who I later learned had my worst interests in mind, was cheating on me, and was actively abusing me. And yet I stayed because I was desperate for real love. It became much easier to have healthy relationships when I realized that both myself and my partners were the problem. I stopped blaming them completely and realized that I needed to be doing my work. And it wasn't working because neither of us were doing our attachment work. I had a pattern, one I thought impossible to break, of getting stuck in this eternal cycle of 3-month relationships that would implode on themselves. I desperately wanted something different, and I asked myself very honestly, how do I do such a thing? What keeps going wrong? And how can I navigate healthier relationships and not latch on with that anxious attachment and drive people away, triggering their avoidant attachment? So, how did I get to where I am now? A mostly securely attached non-monogamy and sex educator with multiple healthy relationships and a deeper understanding of myself than most people in their 20s. The answer is this: 16 years of therapy, nearly 4 years of relational 12-step programs, a special interest in psychology, and a lot of reading and talking about codependency, non-monogamy, attachment, and trauma. There were a few foundational tenets of my unlearning of monogamy that allowed me to finally, after years of emotional turmoil, experience increasingly less volatile relationships that fulfilled more of the needs I had always had but had been shoving down. I remember curling up on my housing collective's couch at 21 for hours at a time reading The Ethical Slut, and it felt like pieces of me were being pulled apart and examined by some entity that wasn't me. It was very uncomfortable, but in the coming weeks I realized that it felt like all those pulled apart pieces were being rearranged, and they settled in my heart space and my stomach almost without needing to be told where to go. The foundational understandings that solidified in me as a result of that process allowed me to move through jealousy and fear that inevitably came up. Those understandings are based on 2 core ideas. 1, just as I needed to learn non-monogamy, I needed to unlearn monogamy. Mel Cassidy's idea of the monogamy hangover was fundamental to this understanding, and it allowed me to hold space for my grief and my fear as I moved into a new way of relating. Mel's actually here today, and you'll hear from them later on somatic practices and trauma-informed relating, so be sure to stick around for that. The second core tenet is that my partner's love for someone else is not a threat to their love for me. Love is an infinite resource, even though time and energy are not. Just because my partner loves somebody else does not mean that they're thinking of leaving me, but that they trust me enough to keep me in the loop about their connections with other people, and sometimes trusting me enough to allow me to witness it. This reframing, paired with somatic nervous system regulation and a lot of therapy, allowed me to learn not only cognitively, but in my body, that those I love will return, even if that means dealing with emotional or physical distance for a time, dysregulation, or temporarily painful feelings. They will return because they have the freedom to be with anyone, and they still choose to be with me. Thus, we come back to the 2 ideas I opened with. Healing attachment is about A, re-regulating the nervous system to trust, and B, appropriately reframing emotions to better serve us. It is about reminding ourselves that 1, love is an infinite resource, which means that 2, our partner's love for other people is not a threat to their love for us. In fact, I can experience joy for my partners. I can experience compersion as proof that I am loving and loved, that I have something worth protecting, but that it's safe enough not to defend it with my life. However, there are lives to defend. There are things worth defending with our lives, and that is why we are all here. Some folks have questioned why we're relating polyamory to Palestine, and to that I call back to the feminist movements of the 1960s to say the personal is political. Thus, polyamory is political. Thank you for being here. Free Palestine.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And yeah, we're trying to make this as accessible as possible, and Radikal will be around to answer some questions in the chat. I saw there was someone asking about like the relational 12-step program. So yeah, thank you for sharing. Right, next speaker is Kiley from the Pineapple Express podcast. Kiley will be sharing how millennials and Gen Z are rejecting traditional swinger culture and embracing non-monogamy and sex positivity without labels. So I'm going to ask to unmute now, and also try and spotlight.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I feel privileged to be a part of this, and I'll introduce myself really quick. So my name is Kiley, and I'm the host of the Pineapple Express podcast, and I'm a proud queer millennial swinger, and I'm an advocate for sex workers and non-monogamous lifestyles. And I'm really passionate about creating inclusive swinger communities. And I'm currently in school for sex and relationship coaching with Somatica, and I volunteer with a lot of sexual freedom organizations. So today I'm going to be talking about conscious swinging and sort of the new age of swinging. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but millennials are 50% of the swinger community now, and that's growing by the day. So what does conscious swinging mean? So conscious swinging involves practicing open relationships with a high level of awareness. And it's all about communication and respect, not just for your partner, but for your community. Swingers engaging in this approach place this like emphasis on this honesty and emotional connection, and of course, consent. Consent is one of the cornerstones of swinger culture for sure. And being a conscious swinger involves a deep connection to yourself and your partner and your non-monogamous community. And we all know that non-monogamy really naturally arises from a state of loving all people. And this path requires owning our own jealousy, accepting others as they are, and developing our own sense of personal wholeness, and empowering ourselves to express our sexual preferences and identities. And we can only do this in inclusive environments. So how can we connect more with ourselves? I think being a conscious swinger involves connecting more to ourselves and practicing when we're practicing swinging and non-monogamy. It's important to engage in self-reflection, to understand our own desires and boundaries and emotional states. We can do this by mindfulness practices, practicing meditation, journaling, self-help books, books like Polysecure and different books where we can really reflect on ourselves as humans, and also working with our partner and connecting more with our partner, consciously connecting to them, regularly discussing feelings and experiences to maintain an emotional intimacy with them, to prioritize each other's needs and comfort levels, and to schedule quality time together outside of swinging activities. So this can be like setting time aside at events to have check-ins with your partners, dating your partner. We can do this by connecting during those intimate encounters at events as well. And I think the most important aspect of being a conscious swinger is in community. When we're approaching the lifestyle, we need to approach it with a heightened awareness and respect, and above all, integrity. And this involves clear communication about our boundaries, desires, and of course, again, consent. And it's ensuring that all interactions are respectful and consensual. And it means defining our core values centered around inclusivity, consent, and even spirituality can be a part of that practice. We want to create environments that welcome all genders and gender identities, all body types, all sexual orientations, and create safe spaces where members feel supported and heard. I believe that the swinger community having diverse leadership and accessible, varied events, though, that's going to be crucial to this new age of swinging that's developing. And I think that as our community is evolving and as Gen Z and millennials are coming into these practices, we have to make it more accessible to everybody. And I think it's just really important to embrace all humans in our community and be more compassionate and open-minded than ever before. And when we have diverse viewpoints and identities in our community, we can thrive, and promoting genuine connections can give us a sense of belonging. So yeah, I just wanted to say that, like, I think swinging is evolving. It's not quite what everyone thinks it is. It's really become it's like a community of people who just want to share love and be free. And I want to just thank you guys for being here so much in community with me. And this is an awesome, amazing event. Thank you, Leanne, for hosting this. And I'm so proud of everyone for being here. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kylie. And yeah, like really loved everything that you said there. Yeah, like I think that some people had questions about like kind of the difference between kind of swinging and other types of non-monogamy. And it's possible to identify as both polyamorous and a swinger. I did for a very long time. And yeah, kind of just want to say that like there are many valid expressions and forms of non-monogamy, and there's also a progressive swinging movement that I've seen a bit of online that I think is super cool. But anyway, moving on. Our next speaker is Yaz at yaz.thehuman. And Yaz will be talking about tools for processing big feelings, such as jealousy and compersion. I'm going to unmute them now and also spotlight them. And yeah.
Hello. I hope that you are all able to hear me. My name is Yaz. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a non-binary, bisexual, Middle Eastern queer, and I am very honored to be part of this event and speaking to you all. Tons of badass, super smart humans here, and it's an honor. So today we're talking about big feelings, which we often experience when we care about things. So this brief introduction is about experiencing and communicating your emotions, which can be applied to any relationship, platonic friendship, familial dynamics, but I'm speaking about this through a lens of non-monogamy and polyamory. So the skill that we're working on developing today here is emotional awareness, which is defined as the ability to recognize, understand, and identify one's own emotions or the emotions of others. But I find this definition to be a little bit too heady. It doesn't involve the body stuff that's included in this. So when I think about this for myself, I like to add the idea of it also being a willingness to give space to experience the feeling in an embodied way as part of my understanding of this skill. So let's talk a little bit about the emotional binary. So when we think about, common big feelings that we experience in a polyamorous dynamic, they might be feeling safe, jealous, insecure, compersion, overwhelmed, and all of the other things that we can experience across this wide spectrum. And automatically, our brains start to categorize these as being good things or bad things. And personally, I am constantly trying to work through this idea of the bad, good emotions binary and encourage myself to simply reframe all emotions as neutral data points that are often incredibly nuanced. And with this reframe comes the acknowledgement that inherently all of my emotions are valuable and deserving of being experienced. So overall, our emotions give us fantastic insight into our boundaries and desires. So when we come up against an emotion that we may typically label as being negative, I invite us to reframe this as information around things that we might want to ask for, in the same way that positive emotions tell us, hell yeah, I want more of that thing. So that's the binary. Now, how do we go about actually feeling our feelings? Really complicated, and I've been in therapy trying to figure this out for a long time, still in the process. So this is hard to do, y'all, I get it. And some feelings are a lot more uncomfortable to experience than others, but I'm a true believer that experiencing and allowing a feeling is way better for us in the long term than it is to suppress or avoid them, as Marla was talking about as well. So I see there as being 3 main steps to feeling a feeling. First is acknowledging what is being felt. 2, allowing the feeling to be felt. And then 3, expressing and sharing that feeling. Let's talk about acknowledging what is being felt. Main tool to invite you into is a feelings wheel. This is a quick Google, and it is this very complicated, colorful, and incredibly nuanced tool that separates really big emotions into smaller subsequent ones. But for some of us, it's possible that when we're trying to label or identify a feeling, that like the words to try and find it are not as helpful or accessible as something like another alternative, like identifying a color or a song. So while someone might be able to look at this wheel and say, I am feeling betrayed, someone else who's maybe using a song or music as a tool might say, I'm feeling very much Driver's License by Olivia Rodrigo, which is a song about betrayal. It's possible that when we are able to label or identify a feeling, we are able to give ourselves a little bit of space between ourselves and the feeling, which makes it sometimes a little bit easier to sit with. So getting the time and the space to identify your feeling might physically involve creating the space, creating a safe environment for yourself to be able to acknowledge what it is that's happening, like closing your eyes or getting away from someone and doing those kinds of things. And then next, allowing the feelings to actually be felt. When we go straight into shaming ourselves for what we're feeling, we ultimately pause the experience of the initial feeling and replace it or stack on top of it this now new additional feeling of shame or judgment. So how do we pause this judgment? For me, it's often an affirmation or an invitation. My go-tos are often, this feeling is valuable. I have the space to be with this feeling right now. And my favorite one, I am a stunningly complex human, and I allow myself to experience my full range. My partner very graciously offered this addition as well, and saying that if affirming feels inaccessible and extending this kind of kindness to yourself and grace is still being developed, you can offer a reminder instead of an affirmation. Something like, I don't need to feel like shit about feeling like shit. And therefore you get curious and asking, why am I doubling down here? Perhaps it's offering a reminder like, this is a learned behavior and I am unlearning this, or I am safe to feel blank, whatever it is the feeling is. And then this third step, after you've started feeling the feeling, is expressing it and then maybe sharing that feeling. Expressing it depending on the feeling. I may opt for something different to continue the embodied experience of feeling, like crying, screaming, laughing, dancing, shaking. And part of this process and expressing and sharing the feeling may include letting someone else into your experience, whether this be the person who this experience is centered around or someone completely outside of this. But this can be equal parts terrifying and relieving because being vulnerable is a trip and a half. I sometimes can get really in my head around finding the balance between expressing my feelings, specifically when they are born from my partner's actions, while simultaneously owning my part. So I offer you, I'll end my time here. I could just keep talking about this forever, with a couple of questions that my boss, Casey Tanner from Queer Sex Therapy, offered me. Before I go to share my feelings, I'll remind myself to use language that is subjective to my experience, like the story I'm telling myself here is blank, or language that continues to make space between me and my emotion, like I'm noticing that I'm feeling blank. And finally, language that indicates that I am teammates with my partner, like I really want to work and feel together with you. And then steps post-feeling, you may prioritize things that feel calming and are not necessarily positive self-care things, because God damn it, maybe you just need a break now after all of this processing that you've done. And then perhaps to get curious about what triggered, this initial feeling, and then using this information about the trigger when applicable to inform your next steps and how you want to continue relating to people. Thank you so much. I cannot wait to keep hearing all of you talk, and free Palestine.
Thank you so much, Yaz. Yeah, a lot of things that I think a lot of people in the chat were really resonating with. Yeah, like this is something that I talk a lot about with my clients in sessions as well. Like a lot of people spend so much time feeling bad about feeling bad that they don't address like why they're feeling bad or admit that they're feeling bad. And then, you just kind of end up in a bit of a toxic cycle. And, something that a lot of us educators will keep stressing again and again and again: polyamory does not mean eradicating the emotion of jealousy. It means managing it, processing it, communicating it effectively, But, you know, jealousy, you know, is a useful emotion. It tells you something about yourself, your partner, your relationship, you know, it's trying to tell you something. And so, you know, just like you wouldn't remove a fire alarm in your house just in case there is an actual fire, you don't want to just eliminate the emotion of jealousy in you in case it's telling you something that you really need to know. So thank you for sharing that, Yaz. And yeah, like I think that'll really help a lot of people, the words that you shared just there. And yeah, thank you for that breakdown. Right. Next, we communicating effectively. Oof, yeah, I feel that. So our next speaker is Ro of Unapologetically. And Ro will be sharing a reading from her upcoming book about the way that societal norms encourage us to substitute internal security with external control. So I'm going to unmute you now and also spotlight you, and I will disappear.
Okay, I hope everyone can hear me. It's nice to be here. So I'm Ro. I am a writer and coach, and I specialize in working with polyamorous individuals and couples. So yes, as Leanne said, I'm going to be reading an extract from my book, and I think it's kind of timely where it is in the order of today's talks, although I'm sure there'll be other things that are relevant to coming up. Because a lot of people have talked about some of the work that goes into having happy relationships and having happy polyamorous relationships, and the personal work and personal development that comes from that. And I believe the argument that I make in my book is that quite a lot of the relationship norms we follow and we're encouraged to perform in our relationships actually really limit the potential of the relationship and also the potential of the people within it. So so I am going to clear my throat ostentatiously and read you an extract from the chapter called What is Security? Where I tackle some of the norms we have around how we seek security in relationships. So I want to put to bed a commonly unexamined belief that may be used to justify remaining in control. That being exclusive to someone is how we demonstrate love. I am, at the time of writing this, training to be a therapist. I've really appreciated how open-minded my cohort of trainees have been about polyamory and relationship anarchy, with many being actively curious and wanting to educate themselves. I have, however, had to be calm, a good poly, in the face of some typical mononormative microaggressions. After all, getting angry with people for reciting the script they've been given doesn't really get us anywhere, especially when they're not being malicious. One such microaggression happened at the pub after a day's training, as is the British way. One of my fellow trainees was asking me lots of well-intentioned questions about my approach to relationships, including whether I struggle with jealousy. She seemed impressed, but ended up saying, I totally get the rationale behind polyamory. I just don't think I could do it. I couldn't be okay with my partner having other connections. I love him too much. I love my partner too much. What I heard was, if you can be polyamorous, maybe it's because you love your partners less than I do. I highly doubt that she meant to imply this, but she certainly felt no need to question what she'd said, what it implied, and whether it's even true. Is it actually correct that she can't stand the idea of her partner being with others because of love? Presumably, she thinks that romance and sex are lovely things, otherwise she would not want to share them with this person. She loves him so much that she wants him to experience less love, less connection, less pleasure, less novelty, less exploration, and the challenge and growth that can come from that. I bear no ill will towards my peer who said this, but I do question labeling her emotion as love. I do not doubt that she loves him, but if I were to translate her statement into something more accurate, it might look something like one of these. I totally get the rationale behind polyamory. I just don't think I could do it. My partner being with other people triggers insecurities in me, and that I would rather not face when being exclusive allows me to avoid them. Or I couldn't be polyamorous because I want to be the person who provides for my partner's needs. Them not being reliant on me is hard because I believe my worth lies in how much I'm needed. Being the only provider makes me indispensable. Or I couldn't be polyamorous because I fear that my partner will no longer provide for me or value me. I believe that a new romantic or sexual interest makes people forget everyone else, and I'm afraid of not having my needs met. Or I couldn't be polyamorous because I'm monogamous by orientation, and having my partner be monogamous too is something we both find beneficial. If we're being honest, wanting to limit the experience of another isn't about love, at least in the way I understand the term. It's a scarcity mindset, insecurity leading to dependence and control, a desire to be their sole consumer or provider. Importantly, a person may also be naturally inclined towards monogamy. And if that's the case, I hope people will simply be able to say that as polyamory and monogamy become acceptable paths, rather than feeling they need to, I really fucked that sentence up. Let's start it again. If that's the case, I hope people will simply be able to say that as polyamory and monogamy become equally acceptable paths, rather than feeling the need to hide behind a false and polyphobic protestation of too much love. I am not polyamorous because I experience less love for my partners. In fact, encouraging them to embrace their desires is one of the ways I demonstrate the depth of my love. Being committed to maintaining an inner sense of security that isn't reliant on them being my one and only is another way I demonstrate my love. A love that isn't conditional on keeping them close, on limiting their experience, on saying no to their curiosity or desire. Thank you very much. That's the end of my extract. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them in the comments. But yeah, really enjoying the talk so far. Thanks for having me here.
And thank you for being here, Ro. And I'm really looking forward to this book when it will be published at some point in the future. Also hello as a fellow therapist in training. Actually, earlier this week, I got accepted onto a diploma for clinical sexology. So in 3 years' time, I will be a qualified sex and relationship therapist. Anyway, enough about me. And also just as well, like, thank you for just so many creators so far have shared stuff around like, you know, pressure to be like a good polyamorous person. And I think just a quick note to say like, yeah, like there is this pressure to be, you know, perfect and to, you know, be good at everything from the get-go. And, you know, like you're allowed to make mistakes. You're only human. You know, monogamous people make mistakes all the time and are still monogamous. And you should also be allowed to do that as a polyamorous person. Obviously, within reason, don't, you know, go around fucking shit up, you know, but like, if you do make a mistake, the most important thing is that you learn from it. And so, yeah, like the goal is growth, not to be perfect constantly, because that's a lot to put on anyone. And it would be unreasonable to put on yourself as well. Right. So our next speaker is Evita of La Vita Loca 34. So Evita will be sharing on how to show up for your partners and yourself when you experience envy in a polyamorous relationship. So lots of talks today about like managing emotions. So I'm really looking forward to this one. Evita, okay, I will unmute you and I will spotlight you. There we go. When you're ready.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? So yes, I look like Beetlejuice. I'm going somewhere after this. So y'all get some polyamory advice from Beetlejuice today. Also Free Palestine. I'm very excited to be here and to be a part of this. And I am going to be speaking on how to deal with envy and the specific envy that I'm actually going to be talking about, because I feel like the strength of my work comes in me actually sharing about my experiences and the things that I'm actually going through. And so currently, what I'm experiencing in my non-monogamy is dealing with a lot of envy as it relates to my partners having these vibrant sexual lives and dating others and you know, developing new relationships and falling for new people. And my dating life currently is kind of dry, you know, that's intentional. I'm not really trying, but it doesn't make the envy go away. And so having to show up to being supportive and compersive and all of those things, and I'm definitely not one of those people that believes you have to have compersion, but being supportive of my partner's interactions with other people while they also produce in me like this sense of longing that I don't have a relationship life that is as, you know, as vibrant as I would like it to be. And so it makes it very acute when I'm hearing about their you know, experiences with other people. And so the first thing that I kind of want to say is allow yourself the space to feel what you feel, which has been a theme running through here. Is it's okay to feel envious. It's okay to wish that your poly was popping the way your partner's poly is. Like that's an okay feeling. It's a normal feeling to have. It doesn't make you a bad polyamorous partner. It doesn't mean that you're a hater. It just means that you're a human being. I think the next thing to do is to talk to your partners about it if you feel that it's necessary. Sometimes we just kind of, can process things on our own. But if you feel like it's necessary, have a conversation with your partner, but try to do so in such a way to where you are not making them feel bad about their other relationships. It's just saying like, hey, I'm really excited for you that you've got this thing going on. And also, I'm noticing that it's producing in me these feelings of envy. I'm feeling less than, I'm feeling rejection, I'm feeling like, I don't understand why I'm not as popular, as you are. And can you just remind me that, I'm an attractive person, that my time will come, etc. I also want to acknowledge or say too that you should try to have friends that you can bring this to. This should not be something that you are only processing with your partner, because as much as our partners loves us and as much as our partners want to be there for us, this is not something that they can be there for us objectively. So and so it can sometimes cause them to feel bad about themselves, or them to feel like they don't want to share as much because they don't want us to feel bad. And so I think it's really important that we also have other people that we can go to talk about these feelings and to share these feelings with, so we're not processing all of this stuff with our partners, because sometimes it pings up against their things. I also want to acknowledge we can't have a conversation about this without having a conversation about desirability politics. Desirability politics are absolutely a real thing. And there are times when you may be in a relationship, so multiple relationships with people where the desirability politics are not stacked in the same way. And that's real. So, it's not just, well, you just need to get out there more sometimes. Oh, you just need to, go on these different dating apps, or, sometimes there's a very real imbalance to who we deem worthy of desire, especially in the context of who we're in relationships with. And so it's not just all in your head, that your partner may be more popular than you are. There are actual real world concepts that contribute to, who gets solicited and who doesn't, and those things need to be acknowledged. Um, and then I also want to say that resource your life so that you're not. One of the things that have been really helpful for me actually in this is learning how to decenter romantic connection as the pinnacle kind of connection that I'm seeking. So it's the number one thing. I would feel like if I went to a poly event and I didn't walk away with somebody that I was excited about, or somebody that I got their number because I was trying to go on a date with, I would feel like it was a failure. And what that showed to me is that I center romantic connection as the pinnacle form of connection for me. And so part of my like needing to, or help with myself with being envious, is how am I resourcing my life so that I am just, seeking connection in general? What are my friendships like? What are my acquaintanceships like? Like, what is community like for me? And so that way, even if I am feeling like I don't have necessarily the romantic connections that I have, I don't feel lonely, because I do have people that I can say I do have love. It may not be in the particular package that I want it to be in, but it is present in my life. And so that is important. If you're on the other side of this and your partner is the one that is expressing this envy around the connections that you have with other people, I had one last thing to say. It is absolutely okay to limit the amount of information that you get from your partners about their connections with other people. And it is also okay to limit your access to their other relationships. So if you're like, I just do not have the emotional ability to be around you and all of your booze right now, it is totally okay for you to name that. Okay. And say, you know what, I can't do that right now. That does not make you a bad polyamorous person, or that does not make you a bad polyamorous person if you tell your partner, I only have the capacity for logistical information about your interactions with other people, and I kind of don't want a ton of details because it's impacting my emotional health. You absolutely get to say that. If you are a person who your partner is the one that is struggling with this, number one, just validate that they're a desirable person. Number two, set boundaries around them processing that with you. Especially if they're doing so in a way that feels antagonistic or hostile towards your relationships with other people. Also resist the urge to offer dating advice. Okay, like if they ask for it, absolutely, but resist the urge to offer dating advice. Well, you just need to do this. You just need to put yourself out there. You know, they need to find their own way through dating and relationships in a way that works for them. And your job is just to kind of be supportive, allow them the space to have their feelings. Like I said, also draw boundaries around, like, when you've reached your limit of processing with them. But mostly it's just to reassure them that they're a desirable person and that their time will come. And don't shy away from meeting their feelings because they make you feel bad or they make you feel guilty. It is your job to manage your own guilt. And so that is not their job. It's not their job to stifle and suppress their feelings so you don't feel guilty for, having a polyamorous life that is vibrant. But mainly just be supportive, maintain your boundaries around the processing with them, reassure them that they're a desirable person. And then also refrain from offering dating advice if they're not asking for it, because that can sometimes cause conflict. And so that is all I have. Thank you so much for coming here, for donating Free Palestine, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.
Thank you so much, Evita, for sharing all of that. And also love your look. I think we can all agree. You look fantastic. And yeah, like, thank you for naming desirability politics as well. As I said in the chat, like, I would love to be like, oh, well, my partner's got a lot going on right now. And, like, it's someday that will be me. But sometimes that isn't the case, like, because society values and places a lot of kind of beauty or whatever, like, on certain groups more than others. And so I think, like, honoring that and acknowledging that, and just sometimes accepting that, yeah, like, there is kind of some inherent unfairness that in how we navigate non-monogamy, and our experience of the non-monogamy is really valid. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. Okay. Our next speaker is Michelle at Polyamorous While Asian. So Michelle is solo polyamorous, and she will be sharing how to expand your mind beyond mononormativity and alternatives to the relationship escalator. Oh, and thank you for that background, Michelle. That's very helpful. Yeah, so anyone who wants to contribute more for me to add to the total donation at the end, please use that link that Michelle has in her background. I will be unmuting you now, Michelle, and I will also be spotlighting you, and I will disappear.
Hello. Yeah, my name is Michelle Hai, calling in from Portland, Oregon. I'm polyamorous while Asian on Instagram, and I'm just going to dive into it. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the relationship escalator, going to talk a little bit about relationship anarchy, and a couple of resources and some reflection questions maybe that you can think about to, rethink relationships. So what is the relationship escalator? I highly recommend the book Stepping Off the Relationship Escalator by Amy Guerin. It's very helpful, even to skim through. So it's basically, imagine an escalator, you step on, and then you date, you get engaged, you get married, you have kids, yada, 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 till death do you part. And the assumptions with the relationship escalator is that the higher up on the escalator you are, the more successful you are, the more like mature that you're perceived, the more morally correct you are. And so what's the issue with this? Obviously, one size doesn't fit all. I identify as solo polyamorous. Some people define that as being your own primary partner. For me, it looks like not living with any partners, not combining finances with partners, and kind of mostly doing my own thing much of the time. This doesn't mean that, if partners need help emotionally or materially, like, it's not like I just kind of fuck off and do my own thing and leave them be, right? It's just, I love living by myself. I love just living with my cats. It makes me a better partner for all. And so is it still okay to have like all of these as relationship goals, right? Having kids or getting married and all of that. I think sometimes when people, look into the relationship escalator, they can feel like, oh, am I wrong for wanting these things? You're not wrong for wanting these things. It's absolutely okay to have kids. It's absolutely okay to want to get married, especially since, marriage is tied to a lot of like legal benefits and things like that. And the key difference is intentionality, right? Intentionality is key. Are you in these relationships because it's what's expected of you, or and because they actively contribute to your life, or are you doing it because okay, I think I was just repeating myself. And yeah, do you actually enjoy contributing back into these relationships? And yeah, here I'll touch on relationship anarchy. This isn't about like relationship anarchy, but I think it's an important concept to be aware of. And even if it doesn't fully 100% resonate with you, I think it's an important way to view relationships in general. So it basically questions relationship norms. It questions what commitment means. It examines power dynamics. And I think it's important to reiterate that it is like a political framework. And I think to remove it from a political context is irresponsible. And I think it dilutes the framework. So yeah, it examines power dynamics, hierarchy, and it promotes having relationships with more equitable input from everybody involved and meeting yourself and other people where they're at, instead of where they should be or where you think it should be. And so I'm gonna, let's see if I can do this really quick. I'm going to, okay, cool. In the chat, I put the a link to the relationship anarchy smorgasbord. If you go to that link, it's like a really thorough link. I think it has the smorgasbord in different languages. And basically what it is, like when you first click on it and you look at it, it can look a bit overwhelming. But what it does is that it breaks down a lot of the different ways that we do relationships. So like romantic aspects, sexual aspects, legal, child rearing. And I think it can help you start your journey in figuring out like, oh, these are all these ways that we engage in relationships that I just had never thought about before, right? Like I'd never thought about, how much exclusivity or not is important to me. I've never thought about, where my romantic values come from or not. Or if I want romance in all of my relationships, or maybe, only in specific situations. And so, yeah, that's a very, it can be a very helpful chart for a lot of people to, begin kind of dismantling these ideas of relationships that we're like literally inundated with since we're babies. And yeah, so at this point, like I have like several like reflection questions, because sometimes when we're like stepping off of the relationship escalator, we can be a little confused and lost and like, well, what is progress then? Like, how can I know that a relationship is working for me if I don't have the milestones of like, getting engaged and getting married and being celebrated in all these ways that we're typically celebrated in. So some basic questions, just like, what are my needs? Basic needs with regard to like safety, security, shelter, things like that. Kind of like, the Maslow hierarchy of needs, kind of. So yeah, specifically, what do you need to feel safe, emotionally, physically? And start examining like where your expectations come from, like your upbringing from like, I mean, we're constantly inundated with mononormative messaging from like movies and books and like the people around us. Are my needs and wants societal, my own? Am I pursuing status, like how I'm perceived by other people, or actual inner satisfaction? Are my relationships serving me, or am I serving the idea of relationships? I think these can be good reflection questions. And to wrap this up, I think it's important to note that it would be disingenuous to speak as if relationships are all about individual choice, because we have to acknowledge overarching structures and systems, how white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, all the isms contribute to how we're able to relate to people, and who we're able to relate to, and how much access do we get to certain resources and relationships. And yeah, that's my time.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Michelle. The relationship escalator is something that I think all of us have to contend with living in this mononormative society. And so like for a very long time, for example, literally up until like a year and a half ago, I thought I wanted kids. I did not, but somehow deluded myself into thinking I did for 25 years. And that was hard to let go of, because I was like, wow, I'm so evolved. Surely I should have, kind of broken away from that by now. But, coming back to what a lot of people have touched on around like feeling like, a good polyamorous person, especially as an educator. Thank you for sharing that. I also kind of want to speak on a really interesting discussion that's going on in the chat that I just kind of want to address, because when this recording is publicly available, the chat won't be shared. A lot of people have been talking about a parallel polyamory and kind of privacy and disclosure boundaries, when it comes to kind of hearing about other relationships. And just kind of wanted to briefly note that parallel polyamory is valid. You don't have to be besties with all of your partner's other partners and be one big happy family and have all the same interests and hang out all the time. There's many different ways to do polyamory. You know, no one should be forcing you to befriend or date anyone or hang out with anyone that you don't want to. You're allowed to have your own kind of boundaries and needs and individual differences. That's just wanted to say that. Our next speaker is Laura from Ready for Polyamory. So Laura will be doing a reading from her upcoming book, which is titled Monogamy in This Economy. And basically the book is about finances, child rearing, and other practical concerns of polyamory. Really important. We have a lot of kind of polyamory 101 books out there, and I would say that this upcoming book is like a 201 book. And this is also Laura's first ever public reading of this upcoming book, which is very exciting. So I'm going to ask Laura to unmute and start the video, and I'm going to spotlight you, and when you're ready.
Great. So hi guys. Thanks to everyone for showing up. I'm gonna, since someone asked for a book list in the chat, I'm gonna throw the link to my publisher for this upcoming book, which comes out in August, for pre-orders, which includes a 20% off for anyone who gets it through this link. If you'd like to use it, I appreciate it. Pre-orders are great. So I'm going to be reading from the chapter of the book which is titled All About Money. The entire book is not about finances, but because I made a joke about monogamy in this economy, we decided that that was going to be the title. This book is based on a survey I did of folks living in 3 or more adult households, which nearly 500 people participated in. And I'm so grateful to all of the folks who conducted the survey and did follow-up interviews with me to allow me to write this book. So I'm going to be reading from this chapter that's about finances, not nearly the whole chapter because we've got about 5 minutes, but I'm going to start now, I guess. So before we engage too deeply with any of the strategies for dividing or combining finances, I want to make a note of how monogamous norms around finances are also shifting in our culture. It used to be that it was an absolute certainty that if you married, you would share a bank account, share credit, and otherwise combine all financial matters. Women couldn't open a bank account or hold credit without their husband as a co-signer in the United States until 1974, so this was not just habit, but a requirement and certainty for many years. While change has been rapid culturally, and both married and unmarried women now have some independent finances, many people still see combining finances as a rite of passage when marrying. The shift in this norm is happening. Fully separate bank accounts are held by 23% of married Americans, and 34% have a mix of joint and separate accounts, with the percentage increasing in younger demographic cohorts. While the studies on this do not consider relationship style as a possible reason for couples wishing to maintain some financial separation, they do consider several pragmatic reasons couples might, including disagreements about how to save or spend, widely differing incomes, being generally low income, 68% of individuals making $50,000 or less a year keep some money in joint accounts, and 83% of those making $100,000 or more do. And those with a mix of account styles generally say that joint expenses should come from joint accounts and individual expenses shouldn't. All of these reasons apply just as much to polyamorous families as to monogamous couples. The math sometimes gets a little more complicated when you have 3, 4, or 5 adults rather than 2, however. So then there's a section heading, some people jointly and some separately. So let's talk about the most common scenario that folks reported in my survey. Some people in the household have fully joint finances and some fully separate. 39.2% of my respondents to the initial survey indicated that this was the case in their household. In follow-up questions, it was virtually always the case that one or more married couples had combined all of their finances and didn't wish to separate these from one another, and an additional partner or an additional married couple did not want to either join them in a further, more joint household account. In some cases, this meant that there were 2 bank accounts being used in the household, one for a couple and one for an individual to cover a household with 3 adults. In some other cases, there were 3 or 4 bank accounts, but at least one of them had 2 adults with fully merged finances using it. These systems tend to have in common that folks talk a lot about money. Keeping some of the finances separate should mean that each person is paying many of their own bills, car payments, gas, insurance, dates with partners outside the house, for example. But it requires a lot of planning for the shared bills. Is there a schedule for who's picking up groceries? If one person's schedule means they do the shopping for the whole family, do they have to ask folks to pay them back in turn? How are people adjusting for income? Is everyone paying each other back for the electric bill? Do you have a spreadsheet? And then it's a breakout box: Dave, Alice, Cynthia, and Mark. I spoke with Dave, a member of a quad from California, who shared the experience his family of 4 adults and 5 children had with financial matters. It was a quad that formed out of 2 married couples, so they entered with 2 sets of joint finances and didn't want to further create additional joint bank accounts to manage the household. One couple was on the mortgage. They assigned many of the bills into the name of the other couple and then did the math about how much the difference was between these expenses before deciding who would pay for groceries, for example, in a given month. This meant that most months, Dave and his wife Alice were paying for the utilities and a greater proportion of groceries, and his partners, Cynthia and Mark, were covering the mortgage and a lesser proportion of the groceries. They all managed kid expenses together as they co-parented and homeschooled their children. Cynthia and Alice had met in a homeschooling mom group, and all moving in together had allowed them to have one more adult go back to work for more hours, as only one parent did fuller time teaching of the elementary-aged children, and the older children went into public schools. The adults managed their car payments and student loans within the couples they were originally in, as well as any pre-existing debt that they'd had. The methods for sending money back and forth between the couples were less of a problem for these folks because they tracked all the bits of expenses that needed to be covered and talked about them as they happened. If something got out of balance or someone was short on cash, they simply sent a bank transfer or a Venmo or grabbed some cash. The key, as Dave expressed to me, was not getting too bent out of shape about individual purchases. If any one person decided alone that something was important and they couldn't afford it, then that's where conflict happens. But if you can say, oh, I've got it covered, there's no argument to be had. Or if it's something we all agree is necessary, like replacing something broken, that's easy. The problems are when someone wants something new or extra and not everyone agrees it's needed and they can't afford it. This theme comes up a lot in the families I spoke to, no matter what the system for sharing expenses was that they used. If something isn't necessarily shared, but you need financial help with it, it becomes a possible source of strife. All of us being used to sharing in a smaller unit and still worrying amongst ourselves about if we're willing to take on the debt or not helped ease some of these worries. So that's the end of that section, and the rest of the chapter goes through different ways of folks splitting their money and different sort of similar stories of different polycules who had divided that way, and then summarizes sort of things that means for folks' finances. But I'm out of time, so I'm not going to be reading it. I'll look at folks' questions in the chat if any of that sort of applies. Thank you so much for having me and for contributing to this cause, Free Palestine. And yes, in the one where everyone contributes differently to joint accounts, we use percentages and things like that is one of the examples. So thanks, folks. Thanks for having me. And I'm going to turn off my video now.
Thank you for sharing that, Laura. Yeah, like there's definitely a lot of logistics involved in polyamory, especially when it comes to like finances and the kind of bigger life shit. And yeah, like I definitely have encountered this personally as well. Like, I mean, I personally keep my finances extremely separate from my partner, and you know, even my nesting partner of a couple of years. And once I dated someone who had combined their finances, like all of their finances, with their partner who was making significantly more than them. And you know, like us going on occasional dates and stuff like that like was fine, but then we had to have like a significant check-in and conversation if we wanted to, you know, say go on a holiday or like, you know, do something that was a little bit more expensive that took money out of their shared bank account. So yeah, like definitely there are so many different ways to navigate this, and I think the decision to combine finances or live together or do all these logistical, legal, financial things, you know, are definitely things that like can't be ignored and need to be addressed, especially in a mononormative society that you know, kind of prioritizes a couple, or you know, like yeah, like there are legal benefits that come with marriage and that kind of thing. Someone in the chat mentioned that in Italy your finances are automatically combined if you get married unless you like specifically indicate otherwise, which I think is wild, and I didn't know that, so thank you for sharing that. Anyway, Our next speaker is Decolonizing Love. So Millie, it's run by Millie and Nick, and they will be delving into the connections between settler colonialism, hierarchical structures, and polyamory, emphasizing the importance of breaking free from colonial paradigms of domination to foster healthier, non-hierarchical relationships in the polyamorous community. So I'm going to unmute them now. Awesome.
Hello, we are Decolonizing Love. My name is Millie.
And my name is Nick.
And we're going to discuss the historical link between colonization, hierarchical thinking, and how both shape our interpersonal relationships, as well as offer strategies for decolonizing the personal sphere. I'm originally from Kenya, but also spent part of my childhood in Israel and the West Bank, where my dad devoted 22 years to the Palestinian cause. Being here today to show solidarity and support for Gaza means a great deal to me.
And I'm from Quebec, but we are calling from Toronto, Canada, which is a settler colony with an ongoing genocide against Indigenous people. It's thus no surprise that settler colonial countries like Canada, similar to the US and Australia, deny the genocide in Gaza, while countries with recent histories of undergoing white settler colonial violence, like South Africa, take conclusive actions.
Recent months have taught us that the West is not the champion of human rights. The global South is likely to lead us towards true humanity. We must amplify Indigenous voices who offer wisdom that emphasizes spiritual harmony, human connection, egalitarianism, community, and respect for nature, steering us away from destructive colonial paradigms.
It was in fact an Indigenous thinker here in Canada, Dr. Kim Tallbear, who first brought to the forefront the consideration of polyamory from a decolonizing approach. We use polyamory as a decolonizing tool because it challenges the monogamous norms enforced by Western colonizers. Until the modern era, monogamy wasn't standard worldwide, but became so mainly through European colonization and Western cultural imperialism. Colonizers enforced compulsory monogamy for women, while men enjoyed more sexual freedom. This supported hierarchical systems by ensuring clear inheritance of power, wealth, and land.
Consider Game of Thrones and how King Rob's death sparks an all-out war when his right-hand man, Ed, realizes the Crown Prince Joffrey is not the legitimate heir to the throne because, as you know, Queen Cersei is sleeping with her twin brother. Had she been monogamous to her husband, we wouldn't have had one of the greatest TV shows. Had Cersei and Rob lived in a non-hierarchical society, or had they been part of an egalitarian hunter-gatherer tribe of 15 people, like most humans lived until just 10,000 years ago, the actual DNA of their children would have been inconsequential because the whole tribe would have taken care of each other's kids, hence the saying, it takes a village. But 10,000 years ago, something changed. The agricultural revolution, or as I like to call it, the tasty root of all evil. And all of a sudden, bloodlines became important.
The agricultural revolution changed human life by allowing people to grow extra food. This led to more people and permanent homes. As people needed more land, they colonized other areas and formed hierarchical armies and centralized bureaucracies to manage these bigger, complex societies. This setup not only emphasized the hierarchy between rulers and the ruled, but also reinforced a male-dominated order for passing down land. Wherever you find agricultural revolutions in the world, China, India, West Africa, the Nile Basin, the Andes, you also find the emergence of empires, kingdoms, hierarchical societies, and patriarchy. The oldest agricultural revolution was in the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East and was consequently the birthplace of the Mesopotamian civilization. I love how Jon Stewart—
For those that don't know, Jon Stewart is a famous political late-night talk show host in the United States.
So Jon Stewart refers to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as the ongoing Mesopotamian War. The Mesopotamians exported their colonial way of life to the Greeks, then passed it on to the Romans. The Romans then colonized Europe during the Middle Ages, after which Europeans colonized the rest of the world, violence begetting violence.
So when Europeans during their exploration came into contact with decentralized indigenous societies, like all my tribes, where hierarchy was absent, community was a priority. Women had power and agency. People engaged in fluid sexual relationships, and plural marriages and concepts like owning rivers, lakes, land, or classism were non-existent. They introduced possessive and hierarchical structures to normalize the colonizer's way of life, which believes everything is a zero-sum game. Dominate or be dominated. This is why some people refer to a colonizer culture as a dominator culture. Colonizers seized all land, forced the natives to buy it and pay taxes, which required working for their money, often after education in Christian missionary schools. Non-compliance led to imprisonment. Restrictive job options made women dependent on men, while security for women and children hinged on monogamous weddings, embedding compulsory monogamy to culture. Consequently, cisgender heterosexual men dominated, reinforcing gender hierarchy and codependency within households. This system not only stripped power from women and queer spiritual leaders, but also established a racial hierarchy that privileged whiteness and those adjacent to it.
We're still living with a legacy where community has eroded, and we're isolated in nuclear families, many of us working just to survive high inflation and paying taxes to a government that prioritizes funding colonial genocide overseas instead of ending poverty domestically. Housing isn't seen as a right, but as an investment for the powerful, creating a housing crisis. How do we break free from this centuries-old colonial paradigm? We can overcome colonization by coming together as we have today, recognizing the sanctity of life and asserting the human right to self-determination. Hierarchical thinking is flawed. No human life should be considered superior or have control over others. Understanding why actions are unjust, like the Israeli treatment of Gazans, helps to see the harm done.
To dismantle colonialism, we must not only do the outer work, but also the inner work. It's only by decolonizing our minds that we can birth a new paradigm, free from hierarchical thinking and return to some of our indigenous and pagan ancestral ways.
So consider how you can decenter romance and recenter community in your life, how you can collapse hierarchy in your personal relationships and find security elsewhere.
Consider how you can do the inner work of healing intergenerational trauma, much like how Israelis should have been doing, so that you don't project it onto others.
Resist the urge to dominate others, even when you possess the power to do so.
Pay attention to how your body responds to others, especially minorities, and consider what these reactions might reveal about how colonialism has conditioned your nervous system.
And embrace a deeper connection with nature, recognizing yourself as an integral, equal part of the natural world.
This journey inward is essential to fostering a more just and equitable society.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Wow, amazing, powerful words from you both. Thank you so much. And yeah, I have no words. That was really good. Lots of people are just voicing their appreciation in the chat. The way that you tied that all together and made us look at the bigger picture was really amazing. Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so our next speaker is Heidi at She Loves Radically. Heidi will be sharing on boundaries in polyamory and how you can empower yourself and strengthen your relationships. So I'm going to bring up Heidi now. And let's see, there we go. And I'm going to spotlight you when you're ready.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Leanne, for hosting this. And thank you all for coming together as part of this community and supporting such an important cause. Like Leanne said, my name is Heidi. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a therapist and a polyamory coach. And as Leanne stated, I'm talking about boundaries and polyamory today. And I chose this topic because in my work as a coach, I see boundaries being one of the most misunderstood concepts for my clients. And when they don't understand boundaries, they can't use them effectively. And boundaries can be such powerful tools when used right. So I want to make sure you all have the information you need to use this really powerful tool effectively to strengthen your polyamorous relationships. So I'll start by telling you about what boundaries are and how you can most effectively use them to empower yourself in your relationships. Let's start with a definition. The way I define boundaries is as a statement of your limits, how you want to be treated, and the steps you will take to make sure that happens. I'm going to say that one more time because I think it's really important. A boundary is a statement of your limits, how you want to be treated, and the steps you will take to make sure that that happens. That second part, the steps you will take to make sure it happens, is really important. In fact, it's crucial to making a boundary. I call that part the boundary reinforcement. And without that, you haven't actually set a boundary. You've just made a request. Let me explain what I mean. So I'll start with an example. Let's say that I have a partner who likes to talk shit about my other partners. And I don't like that. So I want to set a boundary with them. So I might say, hey, you know what? I'm really not okay with you talking shit about my other partners. I need you to stop. Have I set a boundary? What do you think based on that definition? So yes, I'm seeing no in the comments. Even though I framed this as really firm and used firm language, it lacks the reinforcement, meaning I haven't said what steps I'm going to take to make sure that happens. So I've left it totally up to the other person, whether they follow through on what I've asked. Because of that, this is just a request. When used correctly, a boundary is something that you have the ability to uphold, whether or not the other person does. So how would I make this a boundary? I have to add the reinforcement. To do that, I could say something like, you know what? I'm really not okay with the way you're talking about my other partners. I need you to stop. And here's the reinforcement. Moving forward, if you start to talk badly about my other partners, I'm going to interrupt you, remind you I'm not okay with that, and then I'm going to change the subject. I could also choose a different reinforcement, like if you talk badly about my other partners, I'm going to end our conversation. Or if you continue to talk badly about my other partners, I'm not going to talk to you about my other partners anymore. Any one of these is a reinforcement, which is what turns a request into a boundary by laying out what steps you will take to make sure the boundary is upheld. The thing I love about boundaries and what makes them so empowering when done right is that they don't rely on anyone else to uphold them. It is up to you as the boundary setter to uphold that boundary by coming up with the reinforcement that you can act on that honors your need. So when you are thinking about this in your own life and you are trying to figure out the reinforcement, I want to invite you to be creative with what could be most effective. I say this because I see too many people thinking that the way it works is to say, these are my boundaries, respect them, or we're done. In other words, the only recourse when someone pushes your boundary is to end the relationship. And sure, sometimes the boundary violation is so big or happens so many times that ending the relationship makes sense. But when I think about the clients I work with, I can think of lots of times when they want to reinforce the boundary that they've set with someone, but they don't necessarily want to end the relationship. Let me give you a few examples. So like maybe they want to limit the amount of information they're hearing about a metamor. Great place to set a boundary. Or maybe they want to set boundaries around how a family member talks to them about polyamory. Or maybe when they're done having a date, they need a little alone time, but in order to decompress before they can reconnect with a nesting partner. So they'd like to set a boundary around that. In most of these cases, the other person might not get it right away. It may take some reminders and some reinforcements in order to get that need met. And often when my clients think about setting a reinforcement for situations like this, they don't want to end the relationship if the other person doesn't get it right at first. But a boundary reinforcement is still really important and useful so that they can make sure their need is getting honored every time, even if the other person hasn't gotten it yet. So again, I want to encourage you to get creative when you're thinking about the reinforcements you set up. And remember that a reinforcement is not something you're doing to punish the other person. It's not to control them. It's not to teach them a lesson. It's to make sure that your need is being honored. Okay, there's so much more I want to say on this, but I'm at the end of my time and I want to be mindful because we have so many more great speakers coming up. I'll pause there, but before I do, let me just review the main points I hit today. First, what is a boundary? It's a statement of your limits, how you want to be treated, and it's the steps you will take to make sure that happens. Second, the steps you'll take to make sure that happens is what makes it a boundary and not just a request. And third, it is up to you, not anyone else, to make sure those boundaries are upheld. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for today. I'll be around in the chat if anyone has questions. I could talk about this all day, so I'll be around to answer your questions. And thank you all for being here again. And thank you, Leanne, so much for hosting this.
You're welcome, Heidi, and thank you for sharing all of that. That was a really great overview of boundaries and the differences between them, and rules, agreements, etc. Yeah, like I think just something that I wanna touch on briefly is that, you know, it's one thing to say like I have these boundaries, etc. And you know, like putting them into practice and actually enforcing them can feel really, really scary. Especially if you are like tend towards people pleasing, you know, a lot of people do. And you then have to set a boundary and deal with negative responses or like disappointment from others, or perhaps even people shaming you for having that boundary. And yeah, like I think, you know, like part of being like someone with strong boundaries is being able to hold that space, and you know, hold like those feelings without, you know, minimizing yourself. And you know, that is something that does take time. And sometimes, you know, you're not wrong for having the boundary that you have, but it might mean that you and your partner, whoever you're dealing with, have incompatible needs or incompatible boundaries. And there's a lot of nuance to this for sure. So yeah, in terms of recommended reading, I'm sure Heidi will have more to share in the chat, but I found Set Boundaries, Find Peace by Nedra Glover. And also Haley Magee recently released a book called Stop People Pleasing, which was also a really, really good guide. So yeah, highly recommend you check those books out. Okay, so our next speaker is Annie at Annie_undone. Annie identifies as a relationship anarchist, and she will be talking about RA as a life philosophy that is applicable to all relationship styles from monogamy to polyamory. So polyamorous while Asian, Michelle addressed the relationship escalator earlier and did touch on relationship anarchy, and so Annie will be expanding on that further and how, yeah, it's a life philosophy that is yeah, universally applicable. So let me unmute you and spotlight you, and I will go away.
Hi. Hi, everybody. I'm Annie Undone, and I'm a queer ambiamorous human. I began my non-monogamy journey about 5 years ago when I opened up my previously monogamous marriage. And since then, I have gone through every relationship style, from swinging to polyamory, and relationship anarchy is kind of where I've landed. So today, I'm going to talk specifically about relationship anarchy as a philosophical base for whatever practice you find yourself in. I often hear people say that you have to be polyamorous in order to be a relationship anarchist, but I absolutely do not believe this is true. But before I get into that, I want to back up slightly because so many people feel so intimidated by the words relationship anarchy. And I think some of this comes from some of the misconception around political anarchy, right? People have this association that it means chaos, right? And that's not true in political anarchy, and it's not true in relationship anarchy. So let's start by diffusing this myth, right? Relationship anarchy should not look or feel like chaos. If your relationships are feeling like chaos, that's a red flag, right? Whether you're monogamous or whether you're polyamorous. And it's also not in avoidance of commitment. In fact, since I began practicing relationship anarchy, I have found it has had a profound deepening effect on my commitments. And this is because they've become more explicit and more communicated, as well as more individualized, right? So relationships, even in relationship anarchy, are still collaborative, and it's in an effort to meet the needs of the individuals inside of them, right? You are still allowed to have needs, desires, commitments, and requests, right? And I think that that's really important to understand. Another important thing to understand is that relationship anarchy is not a style. It's a philosophy. And the basis of that philosophy is creating relationships that are specifically tailored for the people in them. And this can mean a lot of things, right? My favorite document and the guiding document of RA is the Relationship Anarchy Manifesto by Andy Nordgren. I absolutely encourage you to read this. It's short and it's a very beautiful guiding document. And if you're looking for a longer in-depth read, I would highly recommend Relationship Anarchy, Occupy Intimacy by Juan Carlos Perez Cortez. But I want to start with this tip because I want to give you guys as many tips as I can smash into this talk. If I were out there dating and somebody was saying that they were a relationship anarchist, I would be asking them if they had read the Relationship Anarchy Manifesto and if they had read Occupy Intimacy, because I think it would be really difficult to begin a practice without first digging into the literature. So if you go and you read the manifesto, there's a lot of room for interpretation. So I want to be clear, this is my interpretation of RA, as well as a window into my personal beliefs, right? I think that everyone who practices should develop their own informed philosophy and perspectives, because that's what RA practice is all about, that individuality, right? So what does RA philosophy mean? Well, to me, it means that it can be practiced within any relationship style, whether that is monogamous or non-monogamous. The point being that you have a choice. You've entered into your relationship style consciously and freely, and that it feels balanced in both terms of autonomy and interdependence. I think a lot of people, when they're looking at RA, they sort of see it as like this endpoint, right? For example, you move through opening from monogamy into polyamory, and finally you arrive at relationship anarchy. And of course that can be true, right? But it's not only true, and it's not a requirement to have moved in that direction. In fact, now when I encounter monogamous couples who express an interest in becoming open, my first suggestion to them is to explore RA as a philosophy. Why? Because this is about deconstructing mononormativity and heteronormativity in favor of crafting relationship types that you want to be in. So people can deconstruct those mononormative and heteronormative notions and still be romantically or sexually exclusive, right? One of the keys to this for me has been seeing love on an equal plane. That is my friendships, familial, romantic relationships, and the relationship with the self. These are all equal types of love. This has helped me feel more autonomous as a being, and I feel like that's a really amazing place to start. So deconstructing mononormativity has been a way to help me evaluate my thinking, right, when it comes to certain concepts like time entitlements. I'll give you a hint. This is one that's really big for couples who might want to open up. Is my partner's free time automatically my time, right? That's a big one to deconstruct. When I've hit roadblocks along the way of how should a couple present? How should I present as a couple, right? Relationship anarchy helps me kind of divest from the relationship escalator. As an example, if I rent an apartment with my partner, do I have to live there full time, right? Relationship anarchy has invited me to bust those mononormative tropes. And one of the questions that I ask myself the most is this something that I want? Or is this something that I think I should want based on what society often prescribes in relationships, right? So whether you're monogamous or polyamorous, these are skills that are enriching and they help us break codependency in favor of interdependence and security with the self, which I feel is really important. So I consider myself to be a self-partnered person first, right? I want to be sure that I'm seated in my own power. And that's part of why I like the concept of decentralizing romance, because I think that it puts me in the seat of power. And I'm deeply committed to all of my partnerships, which includes myself and my family. One of the last points I want to bring up in this talk in closing is to say that my RA practice is something that I feel is very much alive, right? I feel like a lot of people are very curious about relationship anarchy. They're very interested in deepening into those ideas, but then they become afraid because they feel a pressure to show up perfectly in that. In relationship anarchy, it may not be a style, but it is still a practice, right? In the same way that we say we're practicing monogamy, or we're practicing polyamory, right? We're practicing relationship anarchy. You don't have to show up perfect to that. I struggle with lots of things. I struggle with time entitlements. I struggle with mononormative ideals that are just so ingrained. I struggle with attachment issues. And it's about having a place to deconstruct those pieces on my journey, not about showing up perfectly. So I want to really hit home that perfection is not a prerequisite to starting a relationship anarchy practice, right? It's an exploration. It's about seeing autonomy and building specific relationships and how those fit together in a very individualized way. So I hope that I've demystified some of this a little bit for y'all today. If you want to take a deep dive into this, I will be doing a workshop with Laura Boyle on July 28th called What the Fuck is Relationship Anarchy? So happy to be here with everybody today. So happy to see everybody supporting a free Palestine. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Annie. And yeah, like absolutely amazing summary of a relationship anarchy and how it's like very useful to apply to many parts of your life, not just like romantic and sexual, but also you know, platonic, professional, familial, you know, legal, financial. Like there's so many different elements, and I think looking at each of these in isolation, you know, helps you understand like the different layers and overlaps of your connections to other people. Really encourage everyone to check out the short instructional manifesto for relationship anarchy. It's a free resource available in the Anarchist Library. Some people have linked it in the chat. And yeah, like I think relationship anarchy does sound like quite an intimidating term at first glance. And you know, to be honest, like it shouldn't be as radical as it is. You know, being able to customize your relationships, like, and you know, according to what you actually want and not what society tells you to, you know, it shouldn't be that radical of a concept, but unfortunately in our mononormative society it is, and a lot of us are, you know, still unpacking kind of what mononormativity has done to us. It is an ongoing process for sure. Yeah, so let's see who's our next speaker. We're making good time, by the way. We're just about halfway, and yeah, like, so we're doing well. Okay, so our next speaker is Tom at Discovering Polyamory. Tom will be talking about how polyamory or ethical non-monogamy is something that we build around ourselves, and how to avoid falling into the trap of believing that there is a right way to be poly. I think this is something that we've touched on a lot in this event already, and I'm really excited to hear how he's going to expand on that. So I'm going to spotlight him now. There you are. And I will spotlight you now when you're ready, Tom.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I'm just going to check the chat to make sure you can. My name is Tom. I go by he, him. I'm the face behind Discovering Polyamory, which is site, social media, etc. that I tend to aim at people who are newer to E&M polyamory, asking the easier questions rather than delving into all the deep stuff. But yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about this trap of feeling that there's a right way to be doing polyamorous and therefore a wrong way, because this is something I always find very interesting, as I got caught up into it a lot, and a lot of people I talk to when I'm talking to people about it don't realize it's something they do, because we don't get trained and taught about relationships. And one of the things we do get into is that monogamy is just something you do, where relationships are a thing. We all do monogamy. That's how we're brought up. Social media, modern culture, movies, everything just has the way to be monogamous. And it's an easy trap, I find, to fall into, that when we get into polyamory, that it's the same. There's a subconscious belief that, okay, there's a way to do monogamy right, there's a way to do polyamory right, but that's not correct. Polyamory is something or ethical monogamy in general, in various different ways and labels, is about building stuff around you. And I think it's kind of dangerous to be stuck in this idea that there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. Because one, if you assume there's a correct way to do polyamory, it means you risk trying to force yourself into doing it that way. And then you might just miss out on all the things and the elements and the areas of non-monogamy that work for you, that what you want. And it can also lead to unhappiness if you think there's a specific way that polyamory is meant to go and it's not working that way for you. It might be that your subconscious is trying to direct you towards where you're meant to be, but you're going, oh, well, I don't have what I think I should have, and therefore you get unhappy, rather than moving on to new things like enjoying seeing your partner with somebody else or making new platonic friends in the community, stuff like that. And then there's also the dangerous of like abusers taking advantage of the idea with the horrible immortal phrase, well, if you're polyamorous, then you have to be okay with what I'm doing, which I've heard so many times talking to people and online. And it's just like, no, don't allow people to tell you that you've got to be okay with something just because you're polyamorous. That's not how it works. I always think of it as the relationship sweet shop. It's like you grow up being told you're only allowed a certain type of sweets in the sweet shop, but then you look into non-monogamy and you discover that there's all these options and you can pick whatever sweets you want. And you can pick all the ones that you've always fantasized about eating but have never been allowed, but now you can. But then you can also decide that actually you don't like them that much, but you want to try something else. Or you can see a sweet around the corner that someone else is eating that you never realized. Things like that. Everyone gets to fill their pick and mix bag themselves and build their own relationships, rather than just having the bag of sweets that everyone was always told they have to have. And it doesn't really matter if everyone else's bag's different from you, or your partner's. If there's a particular sweet in the sweet shop that you like and your partner can't stand, you've got that freedom to explore that with other people. Or you might both love exactly the same sweets, but just not the sweets you always thought that you would have. So that's kind of how I always like to put it up with. But how do you avoid that is the important questions. How do we break out of this idea that there is a correct and an incorrect way of doing ethical non-monogamy or polyamory? And I think the first one is the horrible phrase, because it just sounds like you're just telling it, but do the work. Everyone here is doing the work in a way. Read and learn, because I came into non-monogamy thinking it was a certain way, and then slowly over time I've just learned to read more and more. And every book I read and every social media account I start to follow, I learn something new and something more, and I discover that what I thought was right was actually only like a small part of the truth. There's resources on my website. We've shared resources on here. Pretty sure every other speaker has a resource thing. The one book I will always recommend in this sort of topic is Opening Up by Tristan Taormino. That book is really good about explaining non-monogamy in a way that's about building it around yourself, looking at the bits you need, the bits you want. Other things you can do is ignore mainstream media, because the mainstream media is not very good at representing ethical non-monogamy in a good way. I'm sure a lot of you will probably have good examples of ways that are good, but I've never seen anything that does a particularly good thing that doesn't either focus on that sensationalism of sex or use non-monogamy as an annoying source of conflict. And the other thing, which is probably going to get me lots of enemies with people on here, which is beware social media influencers. And yes, that means all of us, because it's wonderful that there's so much non-monogamy and polyamory content on social media now. But like all social media, don't be fooled into thinking that it's the perfect lifestyle that we believe it is. Don't think that, oh, so-and-so is on there, their life is great, I want that. That is how you do it because so-and-so has 10,000 followers. They are building their own life. They're making their own mistakes. They are always doing the same things and they're building what works for them. Don't think you have to emulate any of us. Yeah. And I think that is my 5 minutes are up. So thank you so much for having me, Free Palestine. And I hope you're all having a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, Tom. Absolutely super important, like what you shared just there. And yeah, like kind of just something that I wanted to briefly address is like what you said around like, if you're poly, you should be okay with anything and have no boundaries. Like, unfortunately, a very like kind of common and like misconception, because like our boundaries are different. A lot of people assume that there's no such thing as cheating or that we're okay with anything. And, like we have no feelings about things. Yeah, like just like I said earlier, how like the point of processing jealousy is not to just eradicate it as an emotion. It's the same thing with boundaries. Is yes, like I think it's good to work on yourself and be more kind of flexible and things like that. It's also really important to not just completely eradicate all sense of your personal needs and boundaries. That's not the goal. You're allowed to be okay or not okay with certain things, and it's just about finding the people who are kind of compatible with kind of the kind of polyamory or non-monogamy that you want to practice. Ultimately, yeah, like I think the three key things to successful non-monogamy are flexibility, resilience, and humility. And I think what you said towards the end there, like the kind of takeaways, really encapsulated that. So thank you, Tom. Our next speaker is Mel at Radikal Relating. Mel also was the person who came up with the resource list that I shared earlier in the chat. I'll be sharing it again once I find the link. And thank you for putting that together, Mel. And Mel will be sharing about their journey in trauma-informed relating and exploring somatic practices for resilience in non-monogamy and beyond. So let me unmute and spotlight. There we go.
Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. My name's Mel. I just popped my brief bio in the chat, and I'm really glad that we're coming together to do this for Palestine. I grew up in the Middle East. I have a strong affinity and history with the Middle East and all the peoples in that area. So I'm here to talk about trauma-informed relating, and what I'm going to do is a very, very brief, condensed exploration of this and try to make it practical for you. So trauma is defined as too much, too soon, too fast. Trauma is what happens when there is so much going on that our nervous systems are not able to actually process what happened. And for some of us, it feels like our nervous system gets frozen in time, trying to process it. That's why sometimes we have flashbacks to a moment, because there's a part of our brain, a part of our nervous system that's still trying to make sense of that moment. Very often in those moments of overwhelm, we engage our self-protective and self-defensive responses. Now, some other speakers have talked about some of these: the fight, the flight, the freeze, the fawn responses. And I think it's really important that we recognize that in non-monogamy, we might have those responses arise not just when things are overwhelming in a bad way, but also sometimes they come up when things are overwhelming in a good way. You know, that feeling of being a kid in the candy store, that feeling when you finally get to like Pokemon polyamory, date all the people, have all the experiences you've been dreaming of. That is a lot of stimulation for the nervous system. And in addition to that, when you're exploring non-monogamy with very little guide posts, very little mapping of where to go, how to understand what you're experiencing, this can add to the overwhelm. You know, when I started exploring solo polyamory, which is now 13 years ago, there wasn't even a term of solo polyamory. There were no resources. And so there was very little to help me orient to what was going on. And I very quickly got overwhelmed by the good things. I was excited. I wanted to make up for lost time. And I found that it was very hard to actually access pleasure sometimes. All that excitement was so intoxicating, and I didn't want to slow down. When things were hard, I wanted to push through the difficult experiences, thinking that that would get me back to the pleasure. I very much embodied that keep calm, carry on, just keep going, keep going, keep going. And that actually made it harder. Over time, my nervous system built up more and more stress, more and more stimulation, and that overwhelm led to a freeze response, which is kind of like that, you know, when your computer's doing too many things and you get that blue screen of death come up. That's the freeze response. And your body goes, no, we can't do anything more. So what I learned was that accessing pleasure came through slowing down and through working in trauma-informed ways to release the stress and the tension of all that overwhelm. So I want to invite you right now to practice something with me. This is a little bit of orientation practice. We're going to slow down. We're going to orient to our senses. So take a moment and just look around your space. Look at something that catches your eye. I'm looking at the painting that's above my desk and just enjoying the brush strokes, looking at the texture of the canvas. Take a moment to really observe one thing that is in your space. And now take a moment to tune into the sounds that you hear in the space. Maybe you hear the sound of my voice. Maybe you hear the sounds outside you in the street. Maybe there's music in the background. And then take a moment to tune into the felt sensations in your body, if that feels comfortable for you. Maybe just touch your own clothing, touch your hair, just feel those sensations. Now I'm going to invite you to explore what it's like to just release a little bit of self-protection. So if you're someone who has a strong flight response that you always want to run away, or maybe you feel like you move really fast, I want to invite you to just lift your feet up one at a time as if you're walking. Just move your feet as if you are running away. And if that's not available to you, you can just wiggle your hips from side to side. And then if you're someone who has a very strong fight response, that you like to dig your heels in and defend yourself, I want to invite you to just bring your hands up. Imagine you're pushing against something, and then just slowly, slowly push that thing away. And then when you feel complete in that, just let your arms drop and wiggle your shoulders. And then if you're someone who goes into numbness, who goes into a freeze response, sometimes you have a hard time feeling what you're feeling, I want to invite you to just shake your body out. And then just wiggle through all your joints. Wiggle through your fingers, your wrists, your elbows, your shoulders, moving through your legs, your hips, stretching one leg out the other, rotating your ankles, wiggling your toes. Taking a deep breath and just letting that out with a sigh. There is so much potential for these trauma and self-protective responses to get locked into our bodies, especially when there is so much joyful stimulation to find in non-monogamy. And a lot of my work is really focused around how we can apply these principles into our relationships. So this is just a little practical embodied taster. If you're interested in knowing more, I have lots of resources available, and you can always ask me more questions. Thank you so much for your time. And I just wanted to finish with one little invocation here, which is that as we grow our awareness of our nervous systems, may that support us in being able to show up in care and support for everyone. May we all stand together in the quest for healing from traumas that constrict our relating. May we be more open to seeing the ways in which our heart's longings are connected. And may our search for liberated love include liberation for all. And may we see Palestine and all other oppressed and dehumanized peoples be free. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Mel. I think that grounding exercise is really helpful, especially as partway through the talk, I found myself kind of like hunched over my desk. And so that little bit of kind of shaking out was really helpful. I hope loads of us were kind of participating in that as it was happening. Yeah, our next speaker is Sky, who runs the account Femme Meow. Sky will be sharing their experiences as a bisexual and demisexual polyamorous person, with a focus on experiences on the asexual spectrum in the polyamorous community. So I'm going to unmute and start your video. There we go. Hello, and I will be spotlighting you now when you're ready.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here, Leanne. It's really an honor. So I think that we can all agree that polyamory and non-monogamy has very much been hypersexualized in societal discourse as well as in the media. And because of this, an asexual polyamorous person can seem like an oxymoron. I hear it all the time. Why would you be polyamorous if you are asexual? But we do exist. I identify as demisexual and gray asexual, which means I need an emotional connection with someone before I experience sexual attraction. And it is very rare for me to experience sexual attraction to folks. So I think most of us are familiar with the concepts of compulsory monogamy and compulsory heterosexuality, but something that is less often talked about is compulsory sexuality. And writer Sharonda J. Brown, author of Compulsory Sexuality, defines the topic as, quote, the societal belief that sexuality is something that we are obligated to participate in, that everyone desires sex, and that it is normal and healthy and required to have sex. Sharonda argues that this belief, quote, creates sexual shame for people who don't have that desire or don't have a desire that aligns with what society considers to be a normal and healthy amount of sex. End quote. It is rooted in an idea of sexuality, which proposes that people should be having sex the right way, usually meaning penis and vagina sex between straight men and women. So we have compulsory monogamy, heterosexuality, and sexuality working together as this kind of violent triangle that is strangling so many of us in our relationships. After a couple of years in my first adult relationship, I had this moment of panic because I realized I wasn't sexually attracted to my partner, but I still had very strong feelings for my partner romantically. And this kind of broke something in my mind because we are all fed what I call this kind of Disney narrative of, you know, you fall in love with someone, you have sex with somebody, you live happily ever after, and you only love that one person. So how could I love someone and not want to have sex with them? I also really struggled with feeling like a failure because, again, toxic monogamy culture teaches us that we need to be everything to our partners all the time, that we need to be compatible with them on every single level. So in my mind, if I was not sexually compatible with my partner, what did that mean as far as my worth as a person, as a partner? And what did that mean for our relationship? Was the entire relationship invalid? Was it a waste? Should I just walk away from everything because we weren't sexually compatible? Ultimately, I realized how irrational that all or nothing thinking was. That was quite a struggle and a journey for me, but I'm glad that I got to that point. And I realized how putting that pressure on myself to be everything to my partner all the time had led me to having sex when I didn't want to and doing things sexually that I didn't want to do, and how that wasn't fair to myself or my partner, and how it had created a lot of resentment on my end that then had to be worked through with my partner. But my journey into non-monogamy really originated from my desire to just no longer feel forced and obligated to fulfill all my partner's sexual needs. This whole like relationship anarchy person that you see now, where it's like, we don't own each other's bodies and everybody should be able to love freely, like that did not really come until later on. I think that originally my desire to be non-monogamous came, I think, from a selfish place that I just wanted that pressure off of me. And again, it took me a long time to get to that point because I had to work through accepting that A, I was not going to be able to meet all of my partner's needs, but specifically their sexual needs. B, this did not make me a failure and mean our entire relationship was null and void. And C, I could still love someone deeply without having sex with them. And D, that my partner should be able to get their sexual needs met by other people if they desire to do so. So that leads me into another topic that I want to talk about, which is the concept of equality and equity. And this is something that all polyamorous people, but I think specifically people in asexual, allosexual is just somebody who is not asexual. So asexual, allosexual relationships or monogamous polyamorous relationships really need to understand the difference between equality and equity and realize that we are striving for equity and not equality, because our relationships are probably never going to look equal. And if we're being real, like we probably don't want that. Equity means everyone is provided with resources specific to their needs, whereas equality means everyone is treated the exact same way, regardless of a person's needs or individual differences. So to the outside world, I think most of my relationships look very lopsided. I do tend to date people who are very sexual and they will have many partners, and I usually only have one partner, maybe two, and I'm very content with that. But I remember early on in my polyamory journey, people would say things like, oh, well, that's not fair that he has so many more partners than you, and that's not right. And I did kind of let that get to me. And I thought, like, maybe this isn't fair. Maybe I am being taken advantage of. And there was also an element of ego in that and being concerned with how I was being perceived. And I think it's easy to fall into this competitiveness for equality, even when you are aware of it and prepared for it. Like, I remember my partner was going out with somebody, and then I just felt this urge to go find another partner because I felt left out and unequal, when really I was quite content and I had all my needs met. And I was just doing it out of this like obligation rather than a genuine desire to form another partnership with someone. So again, remembering that we are striving for equity and not equality, and that your relationships will almost never look equal. And we probably don't really want that in the end. Finally, I want to leave you with something that I think allosexual people can learn from asexual people. And I will be paraphrasing Dr. Kim Tallbear, who is an Indigenous polyamorous writer and scholar. And that is that sex is just one form of intimacy and one form of relating. It is not the pinnacle of relating. It is not the most intimate way we can relate to one another. Maybe it is for some people, but definitely not for all. And when we take sex off of that pedestal, as Dr. Tallbear says, when we de-fetishize sex and place it on the table with all of the other ways we can relate to one another, it becomes just another resource that we can and should be sharing with as many people as is appropriate and consenting. So when people ask me, why be polyamorous when you are asexual, I respond with, there are so many other ways that I want to relate with people in my life outside of our current and narrow understanding of sex. And I am really grateful for all of my allosexual and megasexual partners and friends for showing me that there are myriad ways to experience attraction and love and intimacy and to relate to one another. And there is no one right way to relate to each other.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sky. And really powerful note to end on, definitely. So in addition to the book recommendation that you stated around compulsory sexuality, I also wanted to shout out Casey Tanner's most recent book, Feel It All. Casey's a sex therapist, and yeah, I found Feel It All to be like a really, really good book for like redefining your relationship to sex. And something that I really took away from that is that sex, pleasure, and intimacy can obviously overlap, but they are separate things. And you know, sometimes like I thought that like something that was like sexual or very like orgasm driven was not necessarily pleasure driven or intimacy driven. And so yeah, they can overlap but not the same thing. And as you said, Sky, you know, sex is just one kind of way to relate to your partners and is one way to express a kind of pleasure and intimacy in relationships. So you know, definitely you know, polyamorous people and also, you know, just allosexual people, you know, there's a lot to learn from the asexual community. So yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for that. Right. So our next speaker is Gabby at Gabalexa, and Gabby will be sharing on purity culture. Gabby comes from a religious background, and will be sharing on the impact that purity culture has had on her polyamorous journey. I grew up Catholic, so I would love to hear more. And I'm going to unmute you now and spotlight you, and then I will disappear.
Thank you so much. I just want to say that this event has been so wonderful. No matter how many times, and I work at a dating app, so I often hear people's like non-monogamous story, but no matter how many times I hear it, hearing other people's experiences and being in community like this is just like always so healing and affirming. So I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy that we could come together for Palestine, Free Palestine. Not only because like publicly supporting a cause is important to me, but because of the money we were able to raise like on my own. Like I'm like, raising eSIMs, do this. And like, there's just like no better way to do activism than when you come together with other people. And so that just like always warms my heart. So just really honored to be here. I'm talking about polyamory and purity culture, and I was raised very religious. I'm here in the United States, but I'm also in Brooklyn, which nobody ever thinks of when they're talking about purity culture. Everyone's like, and I understand it, right? Because a lot of the people who are funding the like purity movement in the United States, which is, I'm speaking specifically to the United States, I know that the purity movement has caught in like other places, right? But I'm here in the United States, so speaking from my own context, like purity culture just swept the United States in the 90s. And it wasn't just like me and my religious experience, which I felt that way until I looked more into it. It was also that there were organizations like spending money funding abstinence-only sex education in our schools. And it was like a disproportionate amount for sure in the South of abstinence-only sex education versus what I was getting. But I was still getting pretty much abstinence-only sex education. And polyamory is so much like in addition to my consent skills, right? I've learned so much more about boundary setting, about being rooted in my own person, like now that I have started to practice non-monogamy and be around other non-monogamous people, and especially in my work as a sex educator, a consent educator, a polyamory educator. But now that I'm like coming into those like ideals, I'm recognizing that so much of purity culture was like rooted in like distancing me from my own ideals, distancing me from those boundary setting skills, because it wanted me to believe that there was a right way to practice relationships, an exclusive way to practice relationships. And I think, you know, as a bisexual, right, I also kind of like undermine my own bisexual identity because so much of purity culture is rooted in like you have to end up with a man. So I kind of was like, oh, like I'm attracted to women and non-binary folks, but that's maybe like a phase that I'm going through, right? I contributed to my own erasure because of the narratives that I'd heard from other people. And so like coming into polyamory was like honestly a great tool, a great resource to help me in unpacking all of those things. But it also like really required me to look inside, like get internal and be like, okay, am I actually like looking at my own ideals, my own values, my own desires? Am I prioritizing those? Am I centering those and encouraging others to center those, right? A huge facet of purity culture was the purity balls, which I was a debutante. Again, no one thinks that New York has any of these things. It's very like associated with Southern culture. And that's because things like the Southern Baptist Convention were responsible for funding True Love Waits and like the purity movement that was financially like marketed in the United States and beyond. But like I, as a debutante, was forced to go to like respectability training, which is crazy because it's primarily like Black people in my church, right? It's like primarily immigrants, in fact, Caribbean immigrants in my church. And my grandmother was part of the like founding debutante committee. And so much of it is like assimilation into a like homogenous white American culture. But of course, like white supremacy is everywhere. And I'm sure that there are people in other locations who experienced similar pressures, right? But coming into polyamory, it was being able to say like, I don't want to have sex right now. Or maybe even for this phase in my life, or at very least tonight. Like it really empowered me to go in that direction with my desires, because some of the first things that is important in sharing in like group play, for example, is like our boundaries, our interests, our desires, right? So coming into a space where people were like listening to what my boundaries and interests and desires were, that was already just like revolutionary. I know at my first play party, they had us practice saying no to each other, just like going around the room, asking for a hug, but everyone had to say no. And somatically, that was an incredible practice. It really like, it transformed so much of my life. And one of the last things that I want to leave with is that I thought I was like healed, right? But purity culture is so omnipresent that it's hard, I guess, for there ever to be like an endpoint, right? But I went to my first like sex trip. I went to hedonism in Jamaica, which a lot of people who are non-monogamous are probably familiar. And I was having the time of my life. I had a great time. But as soon as I left, the anxiety reached like a high, and then I was panicking, full panic. And what I learned from that experience and with researching purity culture in that way is that from our like honest perspective, like our programming is really integral to like how we navigate the world. And it's really difficult for us to like step away from that programming. It's more about like, being in a safe space to explore and like reaffirming over and over until maybe your nervous system gets it, that you are safe and that you have security in what you're exploring. And so no matter how much I have tried, there's always a moment where I'm like, oh no, the shame is coming back. The like pressure to perform in a way that like ascends on the relationship escalator is back. And, I can swat that away. It's like a forever goal, I guess. Thank you so much. I'm really, I know everyone said this, but I'm so honored to be here. I'm so glad that everyone is talking and engaging in the chat, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabby. I'm just going to try and figure out how to unspotlight you. There we go. And yeah, thank you for sharing all of that, and particularly the stuff around like debutante balls. Like I don't think we have that in the UK, and so like that was really wild for me to hear about. Yeah, so just thank you for sharing that. So moving on, our next speaker is Ebony, who runs the account Marjani Lane. They are non-binary and they identify as solo polyamorous, and they will be covering how non-monogamy allows Black people to reclaim their agency over intimacy. So I'm going to be spotlighting you now.
Okay.
There we go.
Sorry.
When you're ready.
I have babies, so just bear with me. Baby won't let me put them down. So I did put a quick bio of myself, so I don't have to go over time too much. My name is Ebony. I go our pronouns they, them. I am the creator behind Marjani Lane, which focuses mainly on the education of non-monogamy for people of color, specifically Black people. If you see me looking like right and forth, I used to have like a little set of note cards, but I can't because I'm holding him. So I have to look at my screen. So essentially, I really wanted to cover this. It's like a really big deal to me. And like non-monogamy as a whole for me is like a deeply spiritual and generational processing for me. A lot of unpacking trauma related to being a descendant of slavery. So consensual non-monogamy can allow for Black people who are descendants essentially of enslaved Africans who went through chattel slavery to reclaim our agency over intimacy. What does that mean? Sex, romance, gender, how we express ourselves with closeness, intimacy. They were heavily controlled, as most people do know this, by white supremacy and white colonization prior to slavery, during slavery, post-slavery. We're still dealing with that to this day as Black people. And the one thing I like to talk about especially are the stereotypes that come out of that, like the Mandingo theory, or Queen of Spades. Some of you who navigate the swinger community maybe have heard of Queen of Spades. And what that looks like. I'm not going too deep into that right now because I don't like it. It's very triggering for me. The stallion, Jezebels, Uncle Tom, mammies, these stereotypes were used to validate criminalization, desexualization, hypersexualization, fetishization, and more of Black bodies when it comes to intimacy. So non-monogamy, consensual non-monogamy, allows for us to reclaim. Of course, you want to wake up when I do that. Allows us to reclaim and remold what intimacy looks like for us on a generational level, intimate level, individual level, cultural level. It allows us to kind of step into a spot that was not afforded to our ancestors during slavery and prior to slavery, especially when colonization was happening. For me, I would say that obviously having my page has allowed me to create education. I think there's something like this. Create education that that kind of allows us to be somewhere that we're not usually afforded. I know that for myself, as I was recognizing I was polyamorous and, navigating swinger spaces, how I felt like I was being fetishized a lot. But I still wanted to be there. I didn't want to be fetishized, but I still wanted to, share my intimacy. I still want to look at bodies and be in those spaces, but it was always something like, oh, here's a Black person, oh, there's a black girl. Understand that also was an issue with me with my gender identity and how that hurt me over time. So I am always pro Black people having our own spaces. I'm always pro Black people educating ourselves and not feeling so much shame. I don't think people realize how much shame comes with navigating non-monogamy as Black Americans in a heavily Christian space in this country where we were essentially pushed into Christianity. And why it's important for us to be able to be in these spaces, and why it's important to have safe spaces, and for those who are calling themselves allies to understand it themselves and educate themselves, there you go, guy, on why we want to be here and why we need to have a platform in these spaces. So it has been something that I think that as a community, we don't talk about enough. I don't think that we are giving enough space in talking about it and what it means. And so that's why I say for myself, it's taking time. I feel like I'm in a pretty good space, but every day I do see things that pop up on my content page or whatever, people not quite understanding why there's not any Black players in their swinger events. And I'm like, well, are you fetishizing them? Are you tokenizing them? Are you still using certain language in your swing communities like stallion, right? Or do you have Queen of Spades parties? Do you fetishize us, right? These words, take it how you want to take it, are rooted in slavery. And it's a hard pill to swallow. It's a harder pill to swallow when you don't know that. And it's even a harder pill to swallow when you're a person of color, specifically a Black person, who isn't sure how you feel in these spaces. So I do think that consensual non-monogamy gets me into a spot where I can kind of reclaim my intimacy, oh, I want to be with multiple people, or I do want to have my family look this way, or I do want to navigate sex positive spaces where I am entertained by myself. I don't need to be there to entertain someone else. And my sexuality is not for someone's consumption. And so I don't know who this resonates with, specifically with people of color. I hope it does. And those who have partners who are Black, to take the time to understand what that looks like for us, to educate yourselves on why this is important and why it's important to know these words I'm saying and why you should be careful and how you are in these spaces and moving in these spaces. So I don't want to go too long about that, 'cause I know I can get on my high horse about how consensual non-monogamy allows agency for people of color, especially with our intimacy. But we do, it's a long process, and I hope that it kind of resonates. I don't have any like cool books to suggest. This is just years and years of unpacking and reading. Like I would say, Alice Walker definitely influenced a lot of my processing about sexuality and relationships, especially as a Black person who considers herself a non-binary Black woman. So that's something that's one person I would suggest to read. And yeah, that's all I have to say, really. I hope that helps someone out today.
Thank you so much, Ebony, for sharing all of that, especially, like while caring for a baby. Whoa. Like if you want to learn more about like the things that Marjani touched on, like a while back, we did a podcast episode together. Back when I did a little mini series, a podcast called Happy Poly Days, about like 2 or 3 years ago now. And so I've just put the link in the group chat, like where, like Ebony went into these topics in a lot more detail. Thank you very much for that, Ebony. So our next speaker is Siobhan of the Poly_podcast. So Siobhan will be sharing on the phenomenon of hypersexualization as part of a bisexual and polyamorous couple. Like I'm really looking forward to this because like we've touched on like sex and sexuality and how polyamory is perceived, and kind of how that interacts with asexuality and purity culture and that kind of thing. So really excited to see you both and to hear what you have to say on this. So I'm going to unmute you now and I will spotlight you when you're ready.
Thanks, Leanne. Hi, everyone. I am Siobhan. My pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Rich. My pronouns are he, they.
And we are the hosts of the Poly podcast, and we are coming to you from London, UK, but I am originally from Australia, just so you can place the accent. Thank you so much, Leanne, for creating such a meaningful event. We feel so lucky and so proud to be here today to contribute. And thank you to everyone for your donations and for being here. So today we're chatting to you about hypersexualization in non-monogamy. So just to get started, so everyone's on the same page, we're going to share a quick definition. We have looked, thanks, Nick. We have looked through many, many definitions, and we actually came across one that really gets to the heart of what we're chatting to today. And it is actually from the Government of Quebec's website. And this is what it says. Hypersexualization involves the attribution by the media of a sexual character to a product or behavior that has nothing intrinsically sexual about it. So there is no doubt that hypersexualization impacts women and female-presenting people disproportionately. As a bisexual, polyamorous female, I often refer to myself as a hypersexualized triple whammy. Each of these three identities that I hold carry with them the assumption that I exist for the gratification mainly of straight men. And while it can be difficult to disentangle hypersexualization based on polyamory from these linked identities, here are just some of the ways that I've experienced hypersexualization based on my polyamorous identity. 1, people assuming I want no strings attached sex. People assuming I am only looking for casual sex-based relationships because I have my real and serious partner at home. People not respecting my time and energy. I once had someone on a date say to me that there was no rush meeting me, as it was just a non-monogamous connection after they had rescheduled with me a number of times. Men violating sexual boundaries I have set time and time again because they can't see past me as a sexual object to the human that I am. The surprise I experience when I tell people I take my time getting to know people and that I can usually be quite picky with who I date. Men asking how many threesomes I've had, how many play events I've been to, what my body count is, and why I haven't done more of all of these things.
Now, obviously, hypersexualization does disproportionately impact women and female-presenting people. Witnessing Siobhan's journey into queerness and polyamory has only confirmed my existing knowledge of this fact. I can say, however, that as a bisexual, polyamorous by orientation, non-binary person, I've had some experiences with hypersexualization too. As someone who was raised a man and is male-presenting, sex was marketed to me as something that I should always want, and that there was something wrong with me if I turned it down. Some of the ways I have experienced hypersexualization are people assuming my only priority is to have sex and not build meaningful relationships. People assuming because I am male presenting that I want sex all the time. dealing with internalized hypersexualization by sometimes struggling to say no to sex when I didn't want it, and not feeling empowered to say no to sex, and that there was something wrong with me because I had been taught that men should always want sex. These assumptions that both Siobhan and I have shared highlight the damaging focus of sex that many of us experience, and demonstrates the blatant erasure of those who are asexual and polyamorous.
So capitalism, it's got a lot to answer for when it comes to how hypersexualization exists in Western cultures, and it is the catalyst for adding a sexual overtone to polyamory, which, as we've said before, has nothing intrinsically sexual about it. Under capitalism, each of us are consumers operating under the assumption that resources are scarce and that there isn't enough to go around. In this example, sex and sexual experience are the resource, and through the media, advertisements, some religions, films, and fashion, for example, this resource has been marketed to us as highly desirable, yet very difficult to obtain. Capitalism encourages us to find a commodity to fill the needs that we have. Feeling cold? Buy a jumper. Want a hot drink? Buy a kettle. Want to have sex? Find a partner. While non-monogamous people cannot separate themselves entirely from capitalist systems and culture, redefining how we relate to others, how we build relationships, and operate within an abundance mindset where there is plenty of love and sex to go around, this is opposite to many capitalist values. This redefinition by non-monogamous folk has resulted in our separation, our suppression, and our hypersexualization as needs-filling machines. When really we are agitators that bear a social technology that could help reverse some of the negative impacts of treating people as products. The non-monogamous community is a sex-positive one. We celebrate kink. We celebrate sexual fulfillment, but all too often, both of us find ourselves reminding people that non-monogamy isn't just about sex and that it's not all threesomes and play parties. But then we find ourselves thinking, but what if it is for some people? That is absolutely more than valuable and valid. Where there's a very fine line between protecting ourselves from hypersexualization and shaming new and frequent sexual experiences. For us, by often necessarily minimizing the role of sex in the non-monogamous community, we feel as though we are contributing to the suppression of our sex positivity. Quite often we say to people, just like everything in life, how people experience and interact with non-monogamy is a spectrum, and each of those points across the spectrum is valuable and valid. Some people have heaps of sex, some people have no sex at all, and all of that is completely fine. For Rich and I, non-monogamy has been an experience that is expansive, but also largely personal. There are many ways to engage with non-monogamy, and sex is just one of the multitude of options. Thank you so much, guys, for being here tonight. Thanks for your donations, and thanks to Leanne. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Rich and Siobhan. And yeah, just kind of want to get on my soapbox for a minute with regard to the intersection between bisexuality and polyamory. And since it's Pride Month as well, so there was a huge intersection between the bisexual community and the polyamorous community, and there's definitely an overlap. Bisexual people are overrepresented in the polyamorous community, and as a result, there's an assumption that if you're polyamorous, you're bisexual, or vice versa, or that you're bisexual because you're polyamorous, or vice versa. And with regard to hypersexualization, I just kind of want to bring people's attention to the fact that bisexual people experience higher rates of intimate partner violence, which includes like sexual violence, domestic violence, etc., than both heterosexual and homosexual people, partly because of the way that bisexuality in some ways challenges mononormativity. Being, openly bisexual, challenges kind of this belief that, you need, your partner will meet all of your needs in a relationship and that kind of thing. And that kind of opens up a lot of biphobic violence. So I have the statistics here from the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey. So 61% of bisexual women have experienced rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime. 61%, and that is compared to 35% of straight women and 44% of lesbians. So yeah, like bisexual people also experience like higher rates of like drug addiction, mental health issues, and yeah, just a range of other things. And this is definitely very much overlooked, especially given that bisexuals are often perceived as just like spicy straight, or like, you know, confused or undecided. So anyway, just kind of wanted to say that like the hypersexualization is real, especially when you occupy kind of multiple intersections. I myself, as an Asian woman, am also hypersexualized for that. And so if we add, yeah, bisexual and polyamorous to that, yeah, you know, there's definitely layers. So yeah, so anyway, moving on, getting off my bi advocacy soapbox now. So next speaker is Sydney at Sexy Soup Dumplings. And Sydney will be sharing a personal story about prioritizing platonic connections in a relationship anarchy framework. So I'm going to be unmuting and putting a video on now when you're ready.
Great. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name's Sydney. I use they, them pronouns. I am a bisexual, polyamorous, non-binary person. I live in Philadelphia, or what is otherwise known as Lenahopping. Obviously not the New York part, but pretty wide. So when I was coming into non-monogamy, at first it was more in a monogamish context where I was more focused on, okay, I have this primary relationship with my, at the time, well, now ex, where I would focus more on like centering my life around him and my like life choices around him. And I felt like I had to because that's what I learned. Additionally, I grew up Roman Catholic and Chinese Catholic, which adds a whole other layer. And because I grew up in that environment, that also like pushed on this idea like, oh God, I have to center like a man in my life. And also I have to center romantic relationships. And then I lost my own desires and like really didn't A, discover myself, or B, know myself. So eventually me and my ex broke up. And I really started diving into non-monogamy as a single person. And my therapist at the time, who I love dearly, challenged me to put a focus on friendships rather than a focus on romantic partnerships. This was really hard for me at the time because I was a serial monogamous, always kind of dating people or sleeping with people. And I didn't really put focus on myself or on my platonic connections. So that was a huge challenge for me back when I was like 22, 23, even up to 24. And it was huge on unlearning monogamy for myself, especially because, again, like I said, I grew up Chinese Catholic. So I grew up with a lot of ideals that like, you have to have your life in this certain way and you need to do X, Y, Z because this is what you see around you and what's the norm around you. And so this challenge also helped me embrace my inner child through prioritizing platonic connections. I was able to nourish my inner child because I befriended those who share similar interests, similar politics, similar hobbies, and identities. It really brightened up my world and also led me to become more secure in myself and also have a life outside of partnership, which was something that I also didn't really learn growing up in a really monogamous centered, not only world, but also household. And so recently, this has come into play. I've been wedding planning. For those who follow me, I think you know that I've been planning for my wedding, even though I'm technically already married, technically legal wise. But I had my wedding in October. And so recently I connected with another Asian American who just happened to have their wedding and also shares similar identities and similar stories in terms of like their connection to their own heritage, and also just like been helpful in the wedding planning process. So the first time we got to hang out, which was a few weeks ago, we made dumplings together at her place, and for me that brought back a lot of amazing childhood memories with my grandparents, especially because that's something that I frequently cooked with my grandparents as a young kid. And just also family memories of like making dumplings together. And that really like soothed my inner child because I was craving that nostalgia, and I've kind of been in that phase of craving nostalgia. And so this is just one example where I prioritize platonic relationships to access my inner child. So for me, by having these platonic relationships and platonic connections, they help me access like my inner child and my inner joy, and all these things that we're told as adults or people who are adults that you're not supposed to access. But actually for me, I found that it gives me more joy and helps me know myself better by healing those parts of myself. Also, by embracing platonic connections, it's added so much more value to my life to not only come into myself as a person outside of relationships, but in general, come into myself, whether that be in my politics or in my identities or like what I really love to do. And it's also taught me to embrace my own desires and hobbies, which again, in turn has healed my inner child. And these platonic connections has helped me to show up better for myself, and then in turn show up better across all types of relationships, not just romantic, but familial, and everything in between, even relationships that I have with coworkers. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much for sharing that, Sydney. And yeah, definitely lots of things to take home from there. Thank you for sharing such a vulnerable personal story, and also congratulations on your upcoming wedding. Okay, so our next speaker, okay, we're doing good for time. We've got 4 speakers left. Amazing. So our next speaker is Taya at Poly4Paly. Taya is in a closed quad of 4 parents raising 5 children in a nested polycule. You'll find a lot of their kind of fun videos and content online. And she will be speaking on polyamorous families. So Taya, I'm going to unmute you now and spotlight you when you're ready.
Hi all. I do have a really bad cold, so I apologize for my lack of energy, but I'm going to try and get as much into this short time as I can. I'm just super honored to be here, and I wouldn't miss it. So as stated, I am in a polyamorous quad. There are 4 adults in our home along with 5 kids. We all co-parent them equally. I have birthed 2 of our children, and my non-romantic partner has birthed 3. And our parenting style, the way that we've approached polyamory and parenting, has changed so many times over the years, and I imagine it will just continue to change and grow, and we'll find new and better ways to approach things. The one thing I want to touch on just really quickly is that I get a lot of questions about how to talk to kids about polyamory, how to tell your children about polyamory. I know there are a lot of polyamorous people out there who are parents, and many people don't involve their children at all. And for us, we wanted a unit. We bonded with the 2 older kids that our partners had very quickly. They were 4 and 5 when we met, and it felt like family. And so we were looking for an age-appropriate response to talk to them about our relationship dynamic, and that's really what we landed on, is just discussing our relationship dynamics and all relationship dynamics. Some people prefer to love one person. Some people prefer to not be in a relationship at all. Some people love multiple people. And for kids, I mean, as I'm sure many of you know, they don't care. They don't care. For them, it was an explanation of some people do it this way, others do it this way. We did have some family too who were very hesitant about having us around their children, and I really encouraged them to just have this conversation of, it doesn't have to be about sex. It can strictly stay around relationship dynamics. And so that conversation, as they've gotten older, has just expanded and become more and more in depth as they get older. And it has been really beneficial to us and opens a lot of great conversations with our kids. And our kids are incredibly accepting and understanding of other people and curious about the world. And you'd be amazed how easily these kids take in this information. I wanted to mention a couple other things about how we navigate a world that's just built for two parents. We've had 3 kids since we've been together, and those 3 do have hyphenated names. We chose to do that just to feel more like a unit. And although it doesn't give us anything legally, there is something about our society that acknowledges people with similar they're the same last name. So we hyphenated their names. We do plan on hyphenating all of our last names eventually. And that's, again, like a part of that, I don't know, family escalator, I suppose. I just made that up. I've never heard that before. But that we wanted for ourselves, and we get to pick our last name. And so we did that. We show up on the first day of school, and we usually, at least 2 of us, will bring a little postcard. It's got a picture of our family and a little blurb. We use the term blended family a lot because that feels very non-threatening to people who don't understand polyamory. And then if they ask questions, we're always open to talking more about it. But we want to have that conversation with our children's teachers so that they don't have to be hidden in a space where they show up every day. And we've had no pushback. We've had no bullying. We've had no issues with their teachers. In fact, they bring home multiple gifts around holidays for Mother's Day, Father's Day. The teachers ask how they can accommodate us. They have been fantastic. And I would like to mention that we do live in a small rural town, and I'm just blown away by how our honesty can be met with compassion a lot of times, not all the time, but most times. The last thing that I wanted to bring up is we are looking into third-party adoption. We are at the very, very beginnings of this. It is not available in many states, but we have spoken to a couple different attorneys about this, and it is available in our state. In our state, we are only allowed to put 2 parents on the birth certificate, one being the birthing mother and the other being the spouse of the birthing mother. And so we are looking into legally adopting the kids who we are not biologically related to. And the answer basically is there's a chance. It's not written out of how the adoption laws are written. This might sound ignorant in the way that I'm stating it, but like I said, we're very much still learning. And so what we've learned is that it doesn't discount it. And so we are working on getting in front of a judge and having that conversation. And I'm really looking forward to sharing this experience. There's so much about this that I'm looking forward to sharing, but I'm already over time. So my inbox is always open. This is a learning experience for us. And again, I'm just so honored to be here. I'm excited to share this whole learning experience with you as we go, and so much more to come on all of this. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Taya, for sharing all of that. And yeah, really exciting to kind of hear more about your journey with legal adoption. And I'm just going to remove your spotlight now. There we go. Yeah, like I think, you know, as other people have touched on in this event today, like the logistics of navigating polyamory and the kind of more relationship escalator kind of type things in a mononormative world is definitely challenging. And, you know, like we are kind of making waves. The like Open, a charity, have definitely done a lot in just advancing legal rights for kind of protection for polyamorous people in the workplace, and, you know, in like kind of family law and that kind of thing. And I'm hoping to kind of see more change in that realm kind of sweeping across the world. Also, some additional resources. There is a body of research dedicated to kind of polyamorous families done by Dr. Elizabeth Sheff. She wrote a book called The Polyamorous Next Door, which, yeah, like basically is about polyamorous families, especially kind of children growing up in polyamorous families, and kind of the pros and cons of that, as there are pros and cons in monogamous families as well. So our next speaker is Rebecca from the account More Than Two Love. Rebecca will be sharing her story of her throuple breakup and what she learnt from it. So I'm going to put you on now. There we go. Hi, Rebecca, and I'll spotlight you when you're ready.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca. I'm so excited to be here today. I feel honored to be a part of this cause and to be able to make such an impact. I think we we're trying to raise as much as possible, and we put like a goal of 15,000, and the fact that we exceeded that is exceptional. So thank you all for helping us get there. And Leanne, thank you for putting this on and organizing it all. So thank you so much. So I am a polyamorous bisexual woman, and I currently am in a throuple, but we are an open throuple, so we do date outside of our dynamic. But I previously was in another throuple and went through a very public throuple breakup. And it was really hard to make the decision to share that breakup so publicly. And I think it's because so many people say polyamory is unsuccessful. It's not going to work out. And so there's that fear and that perfectionism of, I need to set this example. I have had this page for, let's see, I think I had the page for 7 years at the time of the breakup. And so I was very nervous about sharing that aspect because, you know, how many people were going to feel defeated if I shared that my relationship ended. But I felt the need to share that because I want to spread awareness, because the relationship ended due to abuse and also due to cheating. And so if I didn't share that, how many other people were going to stay in their dynamic because of that? And so we have had so many people come out to us letting us know that this either is currently happening to them, is going to happen to them, had happened to them, and so many people that are, you know, large influencers who had no idea. Like we had no idea that they went through a similar thing. So super grateful I shared that. I know I only have a limited amount of time, so I'm trying to keep it brief. But I will start with one of the hardest things is that people really did not hold space for our grief and loss. They felt that, you know, okay, you went through this breakup, but Carla and I, my wife, we still had each other. So our husband no longer being with us wasn't a loss, and they couldn't help us process that. Because society just didn't see it as valid. So that was a really tough thing to overcome during our breakup. The biggest thing that really helped us through the healing process is community. I feel like when you go through a breakup, you feel a lack of love, you lost love. So you look around you, and sometimes it's easy to forget that there is still so much love in your life. So our sense of community, both on Instagram, in life, you know, anywhere, made us feel just so seen and heard, especially having community that is non-monogamous and understood what this process felt like. And then it also, the more that I spoke on it, the less power it had over me. So all of the times that I felt so ashamed of it, I felt every time I spoke on it, like my shame just continued to go away, and I continued to felt, you know, empowered by myself instead of letting this breakup and what happened to me have its power over me. So definitely that was a huge part of my healing process. And then I also wanted to say that the last factor in processing my breakup that was really, you know, something I didn't anticipate is, it is one thing to go through a breakup, but it is a whole nother thing to go through a breakup with a partner in polyamory or multiple partners, because you're processing your own emotions, you're going through your own pain, but your grieving process may look completely different from your partner's. And so it's really hard. You just want to kind of maybe think, okay, I should just be at the same pace as them. I should have processed it by now, or I should be, you know, I should reel back. Why did I process too much? And Carla and I constantly went through this battle of us being on different trajectories of the healing process and feeling a lot of guilt and shame around it. Obviously, therapy was a huge, huge help, and doing just a lot of self-reflection and healing independently. I think, yes, of course, you're healing together, but you also need to take the time to heal separately, because you're entering this new phase of your relationship and this new phase of who you are. But it just really was so amazing to go through, and we look back now and we learned so much. And I think the biggest thing is something I always said previous to the breakup was staying unattached to our dynamic, because I was open to however it, you know, grew and changed over time. And I did not anticipate that a part of our changing dynamic would be a de-escalation. But the fact is I wanted to stay true to being unattached to my dynamic. And this was an opportunity to do that. And so instead of seeing it as this heavy weight and something that like a failure, it was just an opportunity for me to step into this new part of my life and this new chapter. And I am so grateful because like I'm in the most authentic, beautiful part of my life that I've ever been. And my polyamory is no longer for someone else because my ex did unfortunately have a lot of manipulative tendencies and controlling and one penis policy. And I don't have to live under his rules anymore. I get to build them myself, and I get to support my partner in doing that for herself as well. And now we're in another throuple, but we are dating and continuing to build an authentic polyamory journey for us. I know that is all the time I have, I believe, but if you guys have any questions, please ask it in the chat or find me on Instagram. My DMs are always open to share and help educate, make an impact. Everyone, again, thank you so much for your donations. I know it's going to do so much good, and free Palestine. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And yeah, as always, really just appreciating all the vulnerability that people have shared in this event so far. I mean, you know, I'm not the only content creator who has gone through a public breakup for sure. And yeah, thank you for speaking to just the vulnerability of a polyamorous breakup in particular, because there is that kind of stigma of like, you're proving the haters right. I know I definitely felt that, and some other of the creators in the chat have kind of spoken to that as well. Just kind of a quick resource is like when I went through my breakup last year in February, I broke up with my nesting partner of 4 years. I put up 9 reminders for going through a polyamorous breakup, and I'll just kind of put that in the chat. And also me and Annie, who did the relationship anarchy talk earlier, we did a workshop on breakups and de-escalations and kind of how to assess like what route to take for your relationship if it gets to that point, basically, last month. And the recording for that is also in the chat. So yeah, thank you so much for that again. Okay, so 2 more speakers. So, you know, like we will go slightly over time, but that is absolutely fine. We're doing actually really, really well. So our next speaker is Flo. Hi, Flo. And Flo, who runs the Life with Flo account. Flo will be speaking on the concept of compersion and how it doesn't have to look one specific way. So I'm going to unmute you now and spotlight you, and you can start when you are ready.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Leanne, for hosting this as well. I'm Flo. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a marriage and family therapist who focuses on sex, polyamory, non-monogamy, and kink. I've been doing it for about 3 years now, and I just hit a year at the practice that I've been working out with some couples and individuals in Sacramento. And so I'm just going to jump right in because I know that we have a limited amount of time too. Today I'm going to talk about queering compersion. This is actually an idea and a conversation that I had with a fellow friend who's also a therapist in San Diego, Alexa Doros. And we wanted to really tackle the idea of compersion because oftentimes it's talked about as just the feeling of pure excitement and joy and happiness for your partners and their interactions, right? Or just for anyone that you're around and just feeling only excitement for them when they do something. And so oftentimes people have this like picture of like being at home and like cooking dinner, and like your partner comes home from a date and they like tell you all about it. And you have to be like, oh my God, that's amazing. I feel nothing but grateful and like happy thoughts for you. And like, no jealousy, no fear, no anxiety, nothing whatsoever. And that's just like not realistic. And we came to feel that in our own experiences with polyamory too. And so the idea that current society holds in monogamous relationships too is that you're the sole provider for your partner, right? Like you're the one that's supposed to be like their emotional support. You're supposed to do all the labor and like helping them escalate in their life and in their careers. And that if jealousy is embedded into your relationship, you're doing it badly. And that jealousy should be like the antithesis of a healthy and happy relationship, right? But again, like that's not realistic. We all experience human emotions. So when I sat down at the coffee shop with Alexa and we started talking about our own experiences with compersion and the like muddiness that we feel every time with like jealousy and like also weighing wanting to be super happy for our partners and our metas, we realized that when people talk about compersion, they talk about it very linearly. Like you experience jealousy and then you should get to a point where you feel purely compersion and then you're practicing polyamory correctly, right? Or you're practicing it in a higher level than a lot of people are. And that's just simply not true. we wanted to think about it as bubbles, like thought bubbles. So when compersion comes in, you can also have anxiety and you can have fear and everything else combined with that under the sun of human emotions. And it just flows in and out and it weaves, and you feel things at different paces too. So the big point of like queering compersion is realizing that it's fluid, that can be ever changing, and that the experience of compersion does not look one way and it is not linear. You make your experience with it, and some people can fall on different scales of compersion every time. But yeah, purely positive compersion doesn't exist, and so we wanted to queer that idea and really put that out there so folks don't feel bad for practicing polyamory and non-monogamy in the ways that they can, and experiencing all of the feelings that are normal and human to feel. But yeah, that was it.
Thank you for sharing that, Flo. And yeah, like I remember us having like a more in-depth conversation about this on my podcast some time ago, about the queering compersion. So I'm going to put a link to that in the chat. So yeah, people can hear your thoughts in more detail and of course follow you. Okay, so we are at our final speaker of the evening or afternoon. Actually, yeah, time zones. Yeah, we're ending last but not least with Andrea of Infinite Polyam. Andrea has been polyamorous for over 20 years, and she's here to share her journey and how she feels that polyamory has evolved over time. So I'm going to unmute you and spotlight. There we go. When you're ready.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for all that you have donated for Palestinians. I'm Andrea, and I live in Houston, Texas. I've been practicing polyamory about for 22 years, since I was maybe 19 years old. And although as a young teenager, I always wanted another boyfriend every time I had one, and I never understood those types of norms. They were very confusing to me. So I also say I've always been polyamorous. I'm going to also discuss how polyamory has changed for me over the years. My now husband and I had conversations practically from the beginning that monogamy didn't feel right, but neither of us really knew what to do with that information. So it was a roughly year or two process to becoming officially open. And what's funny is since we met young, one of our original conversations was about not having later in life regrets when we were in our 40s with kids. And sometimes when I look back on that now, I'm like, oh, so like now. That was still the day of dial-up internet and encyclopedias. So neither of us had the language of polyamory at the time. We didn't know anyone who was non-monogamous in any capacity. The ethical slut did exist, but we didn't know that. So we went in blind and lived and learned a lot along the way. Had I had more polyamory resources available to me, I believe this would have looked very different early on. This is one reason I'm very outspoken about sharing some of my past experiences, both positive and negative. What started as an open relationship that was sexually open and emotionally closed evolved more into polyamory over time. I was casually dating someone and I started to fall in love with him. But as this went against the agreement, I told my husband, and I knew I would have to end it with my casual partner, but my husband just chuckled, and then he was like, feel your feelings. And so I usually kind of define that as when it changed to polyamory instead of an open relationship. But in reality, had I had those early resources, I believe it would have looked different even early on. So I never had a reason to question that before that, because I think I just never got to that place in a relationship with anyone before this partner. And that turned out to be a very long-lasting, very fulfilling relationship. While I was in that relationship, I finally started breaking down some things that I had never previously addressed. I never had a reason to. I wasn't aware of those things like couples privilege, hierarchy, mononormativity, and that goes back to the lack of resources. And so I think I skipped a lot of steps that led to some unhealthy ways. And then it was about that time that I started seeking more resources because they were better available by that point. So I am very open about it now, but I was mostly closeted until about 5 years ago. Prior to that, only those very close to me knew. I had so much internalized shame, and I was very isolated in my non-monogamy. Around that time, about 5 years ago, I started becoming more active in my local community, which I had previously shied away from. And soon after, I started posting polyamory content on social media. Initially, I viewed non-monogamy as a temporary thing for me, and it was far more sex-based than any emotional component. That was very early on for me, and I'm sure my age played a part in that as well. Early on, I wasn't very concerned about compatibility outside of just the sexual compatibility. And as time has gone on for me, I find that I'm very rarely interested in dating new people. I just don't date new people very often, period. But when I do, compatibility overall is what's very important, and actually the sexual component is not important to me very much in the way that it used to be. My polyamory experiences really have just been a huge path of self-discovery over the years. It first felt like a thing I do, but as I learned more about myself, I knew this is who I am. So currently I have 2 long-term partners that are very, and there are different things with them that I never had to think about before, such as like if there's a medical emergency, including a hospital stay, that involves a meta having to communicate those details. Like those are things that in prior relationships were never an issue. And now those are things that have been real circumstances that I've had to consider. Like actually, how do we handle this? What do we do? And so we've had to actually have conversations about that. And so the last decade or so has seen a huge increase in polyamory resources, and they just continue getting better and better as there's a better understanding. And it's great that people newer to polyamory have those resources, whether it's a book, podcast, blog, reel, anything. I personally have a better acceptance from others in my personal life more recently, but I also don't put up with as much BS as I used to. I hear some people say things indicating that polyamory is a new thing that people are doing, but it's not at all new. We could get into a deep dive of history, but that's a long topic for another day. Many just didn't feel safe and comfortable coming out, and many still aren't out. More people are realizing this is an option and that monogamy is not the only way to have happy, healthy relationships. So it seems to be both becoming more common and more visible. I'm going to wrap it up here because I think I've actually already gone a little bit over time. Thank you so much to everyone for being here, to Leanne for organizing, to all the other speakers, and Free Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And with that, that is the end of Poly4Paly. I am so relieved that we managed to navigate all of that with basically almost zero tech issues. I was very worried that something bad would happen as the kind of sole person just managing all the admin behind the scenes for this. So yeah, just kind of wanted to express that relief. Thank you everyone for kind of sharing all of that. There was so much vulnerability and so many nuggets of wisdom kind of shared. Both in the in the talk itself and also in the chat. So a lot of people have been kind of sharing a lot of resources like throughout the talk and in the chat. And so myself and the other speakers will be going through the chat log, anonymizing people and, you know, trying to kind of organize it into a kind of resource list. So hopefully we can, we can send that over with the recording at the, when, you know, like when all of that kind of comes out. We have raised over £13,000 now. And so thank you for all the last minute donations. We've done something truly fucking incredible together. You know, I literally came up with the idea for Poly4Paly while high, like a couple weeks ago, and, you know, messaged everyone while I was just like still high and just being like, hey, I think this might be a good idea. And now we're here. Like this, you know, it was just kind of beyond my expectations. Like I'm so moved. I'm so grateful. And yeah, it's just really a huge demonstration of community solidarity. So each of you, not just the speakers, just every single one of you who is here and watching this should be very, very proud of yourselves. So yeah, you know, keep sharing, keep speaking out about it. You know, read the resource list that that Mel put together. And also, yeah, like, you know, follow all of us creators if you want to kind of learn more about the things that we talked about. Some of us offer private peer support as well if you want to book private time with us to talk more in more kind of detail about your specific situations. And yeah, a lot of us offer it on a sliding scale, etc. And yeah, I guess kind of one more thing is that, you know, I do a number of these online events, as I've mentioned, you know, like throughout this talk. And my next one is coming up on July 7th. Myself and Gabrielle Smith, who unfortunately couldn't make it to this event, but was very, very supportive, will be doing a workshop on polyamory and ADHD. So yeah, like there's a huge intersection between kind of polyamorous people and people with ADHD. And so yeah, that's coming up on July 7th. And yeah, we hope you come and show up. And just like this event, the recording will be available even if you can't make the actual date. Yeah, and thank you, Radikal, for providing the list of the creators and speakers. And I will be editing this recording and sending it out when it's ready. So please be patient, and it will be out to you soon. I'm very, very tired today, just from having just been so switched on for the past 3 hours managing this. But yeah, really, really grateful to everyone. And yeah, Free Palestine. Thank you so much. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. Okay, I'm gonna end the call now. Bye, everyone.